It's a little tougher than that.
That's fine. You'll get like a ton.
Yeah, we almost take more.
I just think you just, I don't know, you guys have like a midline and a maintenance free midline.
It's a shame we didn't
I'd
have.
be concerned.
I know, I saw the email all my stuff, so smoking on with that speaker.
How are we gonna keep
Well
that
done.
railing on?
I think I'm just gonna.
Ripping the railing right off the deck.
Exactly.
Well, if you got snow bars, it should fall straight down.
It should. Yeah, basically two, and then we'll end up having two on both sides.
I'll get some numbers and see what comes in.
Yeah.
Be interesting. I mean, our composite decks right now, is a 16 by 200 composite deck, is like 25 by.
All right. I'm gonna call this meeting of the planning commission to order. We'll start out with roll call, please. Planning Commissioner Mecca. Commissioner Fickow. Trustee Renner. Here. Attorney Schobert. Andersinski. Here. President Lysick here. Clerk Kellner. Here. Commissioner Bennett. Here. Trustee Howdy Shell. Present. Commissioner Zabruski. Here. And Engineer Rao. Here. Fire Marshal Brock.
Here.
Excellent. With your permission, I would like to do a little jumbling of the agenda here and get some of these people out of here before we attack the meat of it. We'll start out though with the consideration and approval of minutes from the February 25th, 2021 regular meeting of the Planning Commission. I'll second that motion. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
I didn't have any, so I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Minutes approved. Item 4A, old business, village staff officials review, discussion, and status update from the Planning Commission regarding occasion Phase 2 fill project. The property is located at approximately and surrounding South 72 West 23085 National Avenue. It is Zone B3 General Business District.
So we did a follow-up site inspection. We have done two actually in the last couple of weeks. Friday, Will Hine, myself, and Eric were out at the site on Friday, March 19th at around 2 o'clock. It was initially to meet with the DNR, but they were unable to attend. So we just checked in on the site, and everything looked really good coming out of the snow melt. A little bit of luck maybe. I think we had a perfect melt of snow over a couple weeks and no rain on top of that. So I thought the site looked really good. It's still brown, like most other places, but there are some green areas popping up. The blanket held up pretty well. There were a couple areas that we eventually pointed out to the property owner when we met with them again on Tuesday. Areas that need to be kept an eye on, touched up, patched with blanket, maybe a little coconut matting, re-topsoil, reseeded. They are still not allowed to do any work out there. We met with, the pond, I do want to tell you this, the pond was discharging on Friday, March 19th, and it was super clear coming out of the orifice, which I took a video of, and I was proud to show the DNR when we met with them on Tuesday this week. So the three of us met with the DNR on Tuesday. We met with Samantha Cat, and we met with Brooke Robinson out at the site with the applicants, property owners. And we walked the site again, the time that the pond was not discharging at that time. But everything, they thought everything looked really good coming out of winter. They obviously understand there's some areas that aren't done yet, that aren't finally stabilized. And we have not seen a written correspondence from them since last August. So I requested that they update their written correspondence with regards to the violation. They did not think that, I asked them directly, do you think this site is in violation? And they said, it's got some cleanup, but we don't see these big problems. So I'm expecting that will come through in their written correspondence, but I did ask for one so that we can be on the same page as what needs to happen going forward. We talked about when the site will open back up, only for the remaining construction of the spillway at the pond, and there's some little grading at the outlet structure that needs to happen, and then final stabilization. They need to have, based on our conditional approval of the site plan, they need to have a pre-construction meeting with us, and we are not going to schedule that until mid-April at the very earliest, because you know Wisconsin springs are not dry. So that's kind of what we talked about. They wanted to schedule it earlier, and we're not, it won't be ready. So we do want them to start though as soon as possible, getting back on the site so we don't miss any of the growing season. In fact, early April's too early. So we're thinking probably mid-April or late April that we'll have a pre-construction meeting and go over what needs to be done and then the remaining conditions of their approval. So that's it. Application site.
Thanks, Naomi.
Sure.
Any questions?
No, it's awesome to have a very positive report, especially coming after winter with that property. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Amen.
Interesting.
All right, I'm going to skip ahead to item 4B, new business. Review, discussion, and possible action on the building site and operating plan request of applicant Alicia Kelch, doing business as REM Occupational Health and Wellness, an approximate 900 square foot clinic to use proposed to be located in the multi-tenant building at West 230 South 8715 Clark Street. The property is zoned B2 Local Service Center District. The property owners are Brian J. and Jeffrey J. Godfrey.
Right, so Alicia Keys is here this evening, the applicant, and she does business as REM Health and Wellness, a clinic operation. And at this time, she has relocated into the middle space of the building where the mobile station is on the corner of 164 and Edgewood. So there's the gas station convenience mart, and then there are 2 tenant spaces to the south. So she would be the north of the 2 extra tenant spaces. And what she proposes to do there is really very simple, straightforward clinic type uses. There is fewer than 5 practitioners that would be practicing at the site at any one time, and there is no inpatient care. So she meets our definition of the permitted clinic type use that's allowed in this B2 zoning district. The conditions that I've recommended that you would consider attaching sort of stem from my interaction with the applicant about the characteristics of the use. And they include recommended condition number 1, that the applicant would secure any and all building, sign, electrical, and similar permits that would be required from the building inspector before the start of any work toward developing the occupancy. And I realize that we're behind the 8 ball on that, but be that as it may. Condition number 2, no more than 5 licensed practitioners working simultaneously. The days and hours of operation would not exceed 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. daily. That's kind of an outside window of time. That doesn't mean that she will be open all of those hours every day, but that's her daily limit. With respect to employees, there are some, and they will, like I said, not more than 5 at one time, but they'll park in the rear of the building, and that ensures that the client access gets the most exposure to the 8 paved parking stalls that she's allocated in that shared parking lot. Condition number 5, that all signs that would support the occupancy, existing or proposed, must comply with section 1618 of the code, which requires several things spatially in terms of what's allowed as far as signage goes, and it also requires the issuance of a sign permit, so she'll have to make sure and follow up with that. Condition 6, no new dumpster or trash containers would be added to the site. Rather, the applicant represents that she is allowed to use the existing trash receptacle, which is a dumpster located at the rear of the building. Condition number 7, outdoor storage of materials, equipment, and supplies of any sort would not be permitted as a part of this approval. Condition number 8, and this was a question that I had raised for her, and she confirmed that there are medical wastes and sharps that do develop as a part of this use. And so condition number 8 says that the applicant will maintain in effect at all times a medical waste, sharps, and similar hazardous materials management plan to ensure proper removal and disposal of those from the site. Okay? And condition number 9 that I would recommend is just that no new or modified site or building lighting or landscaping is proposed or approved as a part of the use. So with that, I'll turn it over to the commission for discussion and potential action.
Are you Alicia? So if you answered the question about medical waste, sharps, and similar hazardous materials, I'm assuming you're also going to have pharmaceuticals on site?
We do not have any pharmaceuticals.
Okay.
So the primary purpose of this clinic here, so my business is all on-site health, so employers and businesses hire myself or one of my 39 staffers to go into their place of employment and set up on-site clinics.
Okay.
Our primary business lately has been COVID vaccines, and once I found out that my organization was receiving an ample supply, I wanted to be able to provide to my community where I live, because I know a lot of people were having a hard time getting their vaccines. So right now, all we're doing at the clinic here is COVID vaccines and COVID testing. We have no intention of becoming a dispensary of medications or anything of that nature. The future goal would be, if the community is receptive to having us there, is to be able to provide other health services, but we have Jerome Drug next door, so we have no need to be a dispensary.
All right. Thank you. Is there any existing handicap spaces?
Yes, there are. I believe it's only 1.
It's to the north side of the building, towards the school.
Okay. Is that going to be adequate for what you need?
So far it has been. We've only had 1 or 2 at most handicapped people, and the way we have our time slot spaced is that we don't have more than 1, say, overlapping at a time.
Is that going to meet the village requirements, Mary?
It does meet the village requirements already, yes.
Can you envision doing pre-employment physicals and stuff on property?
Correct, yes.
$6 a.m. to 6 p.m. will meet your hours of requirement?
Correct. We were only there today for about 4 hours, so
Okay.
we keep it to between 8 and 5.
needed service here.
No, I think it's actually, yeah, it's kind of unique. It's neat to have something like that right here, available for local residents or even the nearby, communities.
I believe there's a guy up on that in the other mall, or the other,
Correct.
out there at the other end of town, those actually behind, the Quick Trip.
Mm-hmm. And that little strip there.
There, it's really,
Oh,
my
it
daughters have to go through stuff all the time, so,
again, it puts to use that property that's
yeah.
flipped how many times?
Yeah.
And we did make some very nice improvements that didn't obviously require permits. We laid a nice new floor, we painted it, so we really made the space improved and try to be reflective of how proud we are to be able to serve our community that we live in.
I guess you probably got rid of the bait smell, huh?
Yeah, no, it smells a lot nicer now. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the fish guts out of the floor, so we laid a nice laminate over it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so stop on over and peek in, it looks really nice.
Is there any changes in facilities, bathroom, sink access, anything like that?
No, we just made it cleanlier and presentable, so it's accessible to the public when they come as well.
Okay.
And
Bill, do you have any questions on this? No.
I inspected it already, it's all taken care of.
You didn't have any concerns with the list of myriad read off? You are aware of those and?
correct,
Okay.
I don't have any concerns.
Good with me. I'll make a motion to approve the operating plan with the recommendations from Mary, the 9 recommendations.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Good luck, you.
Thank you.
Best of luck. Move on to item 4C, review, discussion, and possible action on the request of applicant and property owner James Raymond to construct an accessory structure exceeding 800 square feet in area on his 1.06 acre property located at West 232 South 8465 Rosemary Drive. The property is zoned R2 residential.
Right, Mr. Raymond owns the home at 8465 Rosemary Drive, and he has 1.06 acres there, which is just over 43,000 square feet. Under our code, on lots that exceed 40,000 square feet, buildings, accessory storage buildings or accessory detached structures in excess of 800 square feet can be approved by the planning commission as long as it doesn't exceed 2% of the lot area. So in this particular case, Mr. Raymond has designed a garage plan that comes to a total of 931 square feet, which is within that 2% of his lot area. And he would like to build it. It's a corner lot, so he would build it on facing the same street frontage on Rosemary as the house does. And he would also meet the setback requirement from Robert Way.
Would that setback be that building plot that I have in there?
Yes, it is. Yeah, the minimum there is 35 feet, so you meet that.
I'm sorry?
The minimum there is 35 feet, so your garage meets that off Robert Way. Yeah. What that section goes on to provide is that accessory buildings in excess of 800 square feet have to be located behind the front line of the principal structure. And in this case, it will be behind the front line of the principal structure as it faces Rosemary. It will not be behind the front line of the structure as it faces Robert. But again, we assign a front lot line, and in this case, that would be the Rosemary frontage. So that stipulation in the code doesn't concern me on this particular application. I find it fine done that. With respect to the architectural design, the code goes on to say that the planning commission can review it with respect to materials, colors, and so forth to ensure that it's consistent with the principal building on the site. And in this case, he intends to utilize those same materials, shingles, siding, roofing. He's gone to some length in his plan to incorporate windows on the various walls of the structure, as well as in the overhead doors themselves that face Rosemary. It does meet, the plan itself suggests that it would be within the maximum 15-foot height allowed for accessory structures as well. So,
I'm sorry, on here it does say it's 16 feet 11 inches high on here, but that was with a 6/12 pitch. I was trying, because the houses have to have a 6/8, so I went to 6/12, but I'll have to then go to a 4/12 then to keep it under that.
right, so we had that conversation, I correct myself. We discussed the height of his building and the plan showing 16 feet. And he indicated that he would be willing to work with the trusses to ensure that it complies with the code requirement for 15. Alternatively, if he feels confident and feels like he's got a hardship that he can defend, he could go to the Board of Appeals. But that's not a preferred approach if it can stay within 15. So with that, there are recommendations that I had suggested you would consider attaching if you're inclined toward an approval of this accessory building. First, that he secure all the building, electrical, plumbing, and similar permits from the building inspector before the start of any work toward preparing the site or constructing the building. Second, that he enter into and record a deed restriction that will prohibit any business or commercial use of the building before the start of construction. So that's a provision in our code for accessory structures over size. You do have to enter into a deed restriction prohibiting business use of the county.
Excuse me, Mary, what would I have to do for that then?
We have a boilerplate deed restriction that the building inspector uses for that. And so we'll send you that, or he'll give you that
Oh,
to sign, have notarized, and then we'll get it recorded.
okay.
That's fine.
Paragraph, condition number 3, that landscape plantings be added in the yard area within 20 feet of the building along the Robert Way facing side of the building as follows. Now, I left that blank because that's something it says in the code, that the planning commission can require additional landscaping if you deem it necessary to help blend this oversized building into its setting. I would show you that on the GIS map. Let's see if I have that open here. You can see that there's a pretty substantial tree line down in this area. Right here is where that garage is proposed to be constructed, okay? So there are plantings from this view angle, and if the planning commission feels that additional plantings should be included elsewhere, I would say it would only be, along that northwest side of the garage.
There, right where your hand is, there is all pine trees all planted all the way up that whole corner. I put in trees.
Okay,
already.
so they're pretty small right now,
Yeah.
but they're there, so that's,
Yeah. I was trying to block the north wind because it comes right down the street here, so I put in a bunch of pines here.
okay. Good. So I left that open just to make sure that the planning commission had the opportunity to weigh in on whether you wanted any additional plantings at this location. The only other conditions that I had were, find my report again. That any lighting that would be put on the exterior of the building be limited to low-intensity, decorative type residential wall lights. So we do not regulate under the code decorative sconce type lighting. So as long as that's what's being used, he'll be fine. If he's going to go to a wall pack, then the lighting restrictions of the code will kick in, and there'll have to be a cutoff design subject to review and approval by staff. Materials and colors of the accessory building will match that of the principal residence. Number 6, no new or expanded driveway cut accessing Rosemary Drive or Robert Way would be permitted as a part of the garage construction.
Can you, explain that a little more?
I thought when we discussed it that you were planning to tie into your existing
Yes.
driveway.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so that's what I'm memorializing there. Is
Okay,
that
so
you won't
basically
be
what you're
adding a
saying is I
curb.
can't put in another, culvert and that?
Correct.
Okay, yeah, that's too much work. It's fine with me.
Okay, so that's what condition 6 provides for. And then
Thank
number
you.
7, that this building may not exceed 15 feet in height. And that captures that conversation that we had about his plan showing 16 feet. So I'll turn it over to the commission for discussion.
What's the current pitch that you have depicted here for the roof?
I have an 8.
8?
Yeah.
And that's what's required in the subdivision bylaws, or?
Well, yes, but what happened was that subdivision folded,
Right.
and then when it came back, but I think everybody's got an 8 to a 10 in there or better.
And you would have to go to a what if you wanted to meet the height requirements?
Oh, I would have to go to a 412 probably. Yeah, but I was gonna go with the 6, but that's fine.
Would that stick out more, being, and not look right in the subdivision going to a 412? That would be my issue. It would be more visually appealing, I think, sticking to the norms of the subdivision.
I agree, but the path for the planning commission to approve that isn't in the code.
Was there something about bonus square footage? I remember some, or bonus height by being off your setback by so much, or is that something from the past?
Yeah, no, that's still in there.
I think we need it tonight.
Right, right. We open up the file and unplug this and jump in my file real quick, see what that language is.
While she's looking for that, I'll ask, is there any homeowner association restrictions on accessory buildings?
No, the guy across the street has one.
Okay. Do you have a homeowners association?
As far as I know, no.
This is what, Windwalker?
Yeah.
Which, yeah, subdivision?
Mhm. As far as I know, we don't. Because after the subdivision went under, then the
Yeah.
bank just
This is the one I
rebought it and sold off all the lots. And as far as I'm aware of, there is nothing.
Yeah, this is the one that went bankrupt.
Oh.
So you change the setback, push it back a little bit further, and that would gain some leverage. Is that the idea?
The new definition and height restriction are 18 feet.
That's right, because we just did the
Because it's
recodification.
no longer going to be calculated as an average building height. So if you're less than 18,
Mhm.
You can keep your pitch.
you're gonna be okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I could,
That was the one that we just clearing.
Yeah, that's right.
It's back to the board next week.
so I can just cross it, I put 15 feet or 18 on here instead of the 15?
Yes.
As far as you have to, not to exceed. But that's technically, we had a public hearing on that.
Mhm.
It was pushed back to planning last month, right? Did that get blessed by the board?
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Okay, then I just wanted to, we
Right,
went
yeah.
back and forth, so I wanted to make sure we're 100% on the
Right.
clear there.
Right.
So yeah, you're good, 18 feet, so you can keep your roof pitch
Yeah,
that's
I'll be at
depicted.
1611,
Yeah.
so that should be good.
Very
Awesome.
good. I appreciate the heads up to look into the code for that.
So many changes.
I'm not quite
You don't have it memorized?
referring to this the way I should be now. And we do still have that provision in the code about access height being permitted to the extent that they slide themselves off the side and rear lot lines. So that's all I get on this item.
Are you planning any plumbing up to the garage?
Mm-mm.
Okay. So no additional wastewater flows or anything like that, obviously, okay. Electrical is going to be separate or just coming off the house?
Coming off the house.
Okay.
Is there any requirements on the heat for that? You guys gonna do a single garage heater or?
Well, I'd be truthful with you, I don't really work out there too often in the cold, so I didn't,
Plan.
as a heater, maybe one of the torpedo heaters or whatever they call them. If, you know, I don't even own one yet, but maybe in the future. But I didn't plan on heating it with, you know, a furnace or anything. No.
Sure.
Do you have a sense of how much space is between the garage and the regular structure?
Minimum 10 feet, required by code. The building inspector will.
If you look at it on the drawing here, it looks like it's awfully close to someone. There's a number on there, so.
You can add that as a condition.
Well,
Building permit
if it's in
will-
the code that way, then.
Again, that's, Vince and them should be enforcing whatever that
Yeah.
means.
Yep.
Yeah, he was saying from gutter to gutter on there, minimum 10 feet. So I think last time I was here talking to him, he said just go 15 feet, because that'll cover off my existing building. That covered the 2 feet of gutter and then 1 foot on the garage. So that'll give me just, you know, enough, a little over to make sure I'm at 10 feet.
The planning commission good with his existing screening on the north side?
Yeah, I think we could probably strike 3 since he's got those trees planted.
Right.
Strike 3 and 7.
Well, 7 is just an FYI, it's not to exceed, it's not saying that he is, it's just more of a,
Well, he is.
Not to exceed 18.
18.
it's
They
18.
changed
Correct,
it,
yeah, yeah, the correction based on the code, the recodification that we just passed not too long ago. So the 15 is changed to an 18. Right.
You're not planning on putting a basement in there, are you?
A basement?
Yeah.
No.
I saw there's some stuff here about stormwater management and formulation of basement renovations.
No, it's.
I think you're on
Something
there.
different.
Am I on something else?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, too deep.
Okay, fair enough.
An interesting garage.
Nice.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Expensive, it's like, it's angry in there. Make a motion to approve with the agreed upon changes, taking out the number 3, I believe it was, and then changing it to 18 feet.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. One more question. What's my next step?
Building inspector has office hours on Tuesdays. You can stop in and see them.
Okay, and then should I bring this then, so I have that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And he'll double check that with the clerk to make sure that they know what the terms of the approval are.
Okay. All right.
I think you're all
Very
set.
good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.
Good night.
Fire Marshal Bronk, would you like to have the opportunity to give your report and escape?
No, I can give you my report. I don't care. But I'll stick around.
All right.
Dedicate.
Then we will circle all the way back to item 2, public comments. Public comments, please sign in. State your name and address for the clerk. Try to keep your comments to about 3 minutes or less, and please no redundant comments. If someone says A, don't repeat A again. Trying to keep it clean.
Sure, I'll go first. I'm Matt Wiersma, SA3W22595 Lake Park. I just want to talk about the storage condo project real quick. So, first thing is the environmental considerations. I know Jamie here had a test on my PSI. I believe it was last May, correct? Right, sir?
You
Either way.
address the commission
Right.
as a part of public.
Absolutely. So those results recommended a little bit further testing be conducted on specifically the landfill site. What I asked is because most of those tests, I think it was 15 of them, over half of them were conducted within 25 feet of the border of where they're building. And I was hoping to have the board consider having testing done in the actual 4.11 acres that are being done because of the close proximity to the landfill. And that they hold them to similar standards. The construction time was specified that it's going to be done in phases. The first 5 buildings would be constructed in over 2 years, and then the follow-ups would be done as they were sold or occupied. And it could take up to 10 years, I believe it was mentioned, the last condo project, and I think that's very excessive. I understand that it's a small business, and developers have more money. However, you got to take consideration of the local neighborhood. Landscaping, currently there's no plan for landscaping on the south or east part of the plot, including the road that separates the lake park and the actual condos. I would hope they would consider some sort of landscaping in between those, because that's where we see the most. 24/7 operation, 40% is expected to be small business or storage with multiple users, with high traffic. Those hours of operation or something along those lines be considered for our well-being. And then naming rights. There's no association with the actual Lake Park neighborhood, and they want to call it Lake Park storage condos. This could confuse people to be able to use the neighborhood, whether that's the fields or the lake, anything like that. And really, it's used exclusively for marketing purposes with no association with the neighborhood. So I would hope that we could come to an agreement to change the name on that a little bit. And I just want to read something off. I say with conviction, it's not my intention to stop the growth of our local businesses or development of their land. Lake Park takes tremendous pride in our community, including Big Bend as a whole, and the goal in this process is to ensure the safety and standards of living in the neighborhood are being upheld. That's all I really have to say.
Thank you.
Yep.
I guess I'll go next. Paul Sweet, West 225, South 8575, also in Lake Park. I now want to echo the comments that I agree with Matt. But start with, again, saying that I know there's like maybe some perceived animosity between like Lake Park residents and the current owners, and I don't really think there should be. All I'm asking for is we just want to all be good neighbors, whether it's your residential neighbor that puts something in his yard or garage and has to meet the requirements, or asking corporate neighbors to also be responsible. It's unfortunate that we have this commercial property surrounded by residential, but I think we should ask the commercial property owners to be respectful of the residential areas. So all those things taken into consideration. I've also, we did not mention the overflow of the retention pond. I think there's some concern in the neighbors of how that overflow of that retention pond, I know there's been some studies that there may be some overflow, but I think it should be looked at how that overflow is going to also go on to the landfill property, and where does it go from there with all the already proven toxic chemicals and irons and whatever heavy metals that are in there. And then the last thing I would add on to with the landscape, the overall site picture of it is we're kind of right now focusing on that current storage condo area, which again, I'm all for corporate people developing, doing something to make money add to our community, but we're not really discussing now what's going to happen as he's developing that, or the owners are developing that, what's happening with the landfill property. Is that just going to be storage of materials, storage of equipment, without any landscaping? There's a lot of trees that were taken down. That's all open that up for residents to be able to see. More noise is going to come through that, so I think I asked the planning commission to take consideration of that, of what's going to be done with that property while it's the other property is being developed, the adjacent one, because they kind of go hand in hand. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
I'm just looking over the emails to make sure we covered the topics that were also submitted, because there are some commonalities to them.
Right.
So the only one I see that's Casey's. So Casey had an email, and there's some items on there that we can just read aloud since he's not here.
want to do it or want me to?
Yeah.
All right. The first thing that Casey was concerned about is the building heights. Per the plan that was submitted, the building heights are of concern to me, especially since there are no graduated step-down building heights as the development gets closer to the residential lots. It is typical in a development like this to have smaller buildings closest to the residential lots. In this case, it is the opposite with the large buildings right on top of the residential lots. Again, for the clerk, this is Casey Mallett, South 83, West 22645 Lake Park Drive.
Two was
Yeah,
similar to the construction timeline that Matt
Right.
already brought up.
And Jamie's Elfenville.
3 was related to the environmental testing or the phases, kind of like you guys talked about, with some
Right.
additional testing related to PSI. So I think we've kind of covered that. That's the environmental concerns.
There's Ben and Jamie's address, so we can get those into the record later. Or enter them. Any other public comments? If there are no other public comments, I will move along to item 4B. Review, discussion, and possible approval of the site plan/plan of operations request of applicant Jamie Peterson doing business as Lake Park Storage Condos LLC to develop a 42-unit self-storage/small business condominium project on 4.11 acres of land located north and east of State Highway 164, Big Bend Drive, at Edgewood Avenue, excluding direct frontage on either. The property owners are Howard Gleason and Maureen Gleason, Extreme Exteriors Incorporated, South 8654 Big Bend Road LLC, and EEI Construction LLC. The property is zoned B3 General Business District.
Just for a quick clarification, it's actually 3B. The agenda is called out 4 twice, just for what it's worth. If you're
Oh.
looking at the paperwork that's documenting, supporting documentation is all 3B. Just clarifying.
That's my mistake.
2 4s.
Yeah.
Started searching for paperwork for 4B.
Because we added public comments late. Okay, Mary?
What I intended to do tonight is to really go back through essentially the same staff report that you saw on this item a couple of months ago, but with some notations and discussion about how progress is being made or changes are being made to reflect some of the things that the Planning Commission was looking for and various staff input that's occurred over the course of the last couple of months. So with respect to the comparison table, as compared to code standards, nothing has changed there, except to say that the quantity of trees and shrubs as measured against the 1 tree and 2 shrubs per 1,000 square feet of green space, that number is still dynamic. In fact, if you want to pass those out, this side of the table has them. Yep. So the landscaping plan is a continuing process being reviewed by staff and with input from the applicant. But I don't want to jump off on that foot. I want to get back to the comments of the staff report. Site plan review comments, that the applicant must finalize and record the survey and all easements, all required easements prior to the final approval. So that is still in progress. The title report work is being done by the applicant's attorney. The language for the 2 easements that are needed has been written, reviewed, and approved by the village attorney, and sent over to the applicant to incorporate in the CSM and separate documents unto themselves, easement documents, to make sure that that's memorialized properly and permanently. at the same time that the CSM gets recorded. So all of that is in process. I don't have any doubt that we'll be able to resolve all of that and get those things taken care of at the staff level. Finalize the standardize the project name. The project name is Lake Park Storage Condominiums. Number 3, future submittals need to be highlighted or clouded. That's being done now, and we appreciate that. It makes reviewing the various plan amendments much easier. Identify parking intended for unit owners, and then what is the remnant width of drive. So in response to that request, the site plan has been amended, and I'll bring that up for you. The site plan has been amended to show the unit owners parking in spaces here between the buildings. So that was green space on the original plan. And that occurs all the way through the development, okay? Other than that, there's nothing that would prohibit temporary in and out type parking, in front of the building necessarily, but these would be the go-to spots to stay out of the driveway. There's also, so none of these stalls are going to be striped or marked in between the buildings, but these stalls across from the lounge building and adjacent to the north side of the lounge building will be striped onto the surface, okay? Jump back here. Identify all pavement markings, so that's the extent of it, just the stuff by the lounge building will be striped and marked. Will there be any internally defined pedestrian ways? The applicant responds, there will not. So people will just make their way from their units through the pavement, through the green spaces, down to the lounge building if they need to use the restroom, that kind of thing. Is there overnight parking allowed outdoors at the site at all? And the answer is no. There will be no overnight parking allowed. The fire and police department, have they reviewed and approved the site plan as to accessibility, entries and exits, interior circulation? They have given their preliminary approval. The only changes were to incorporate the dimensional information on those drive lanes, which has been provided. And I believe that exhibit is just a couple pages down. Is that one of the exhibits, Jim?
It should be the last one.
Should be the
I think it's a different file.
It would,
I think it's a different file. I don't know, I've seen it.
yeah, I'm sure. There it is. So this is that exhibit, the lounge building. I can't rotate it unless I open it as an editable PDF. So really nothing about these turning movements has been changed. The dimension within these areas is now provided. $55 feet. 44 feet, 55, 57. So the fire department will get a final look at this. In fact, I think Bill Bronk may already have seen this plan with dimensions, yeah, and given his nod to this. Okay, so that document, of course, will be included as an exhibit to the attached set of final plans that will go under the overall approval. Other conditions for access. If access is built to Edgewood Avenue and/or 164, what do we need? We need DNR approval to construct on the property that leads to Edgewood. That's been done. They have given their approval to construct that road, or that private street, across what we loosely refer to as the dump site when we have staff meetings, across that property down to Edgewood Avenue. So that permission has been granted. That letter will be incorporated in the permanent documents to memorialize that fact. Easements, those are pending, as I discussed earlier. The desired language has been written and given to the applicant. Has to be noted on the CSM and probably additionally set forth as a document unto itself called an easement and memorialized there as well. Code compliant private road design and surfacing plan for the through route from Edgewood Avenue and out to 164. All of that needs to be reviewed and approved by Naomi, and she'll take up a discussion about all the engineering details after I'm finished here. But I think I'll just defer that to her presentation. Resolution of the driveway conflict at 164. So it is now resolved by the virtue of the fact that this 30-foot strip going from the development out to 164 is going to be exclusively a fire safety entry-exit point. It will be maintained in a solid gravel base. Naomi can talk about that. There will be a fire access gate right at the edge of the development project so that vehicles aren't stopped on 164 trying to get into the development in case of an emergency. So that issue is resolved because that driveway now won't be in conflict with in and out traffic on a regular basis. Number 7, outdoor storage of materials, equipment, and supplies. It will not be permitted on the site, and the applicant has agreed as much. Soil test information and county and state approval as to the septic and the well plans. That just really means that we need to see that they ultimately are given a permit to install both of those things before we would allow them to get started with earthwork or construction at the site. Exterior lighting plan. I have received a revised lighting plan. It includes a new fixture that is a full cutoff fixture. It's a wall pack mounted at 10.5 feet. Only on the interior facing elevations of the buildings, not on the exterior facing elevations. And the lighting dispersion plan that's submitted with that shows less than 0.5 foot candles on the ground at all the lot lines. For the most part, it's 0. In a few places, it's up to 0.2 or 3. Phasing plan. What I indicate here is to see the development agreement and deed restriction for details. So it's an important part of this project, ensuring that we understand how the buildings will be phased in and what improvements will be required to be installed as each phase is built and before, number 1, the units can be sold, and number 2, the units can be occupied. So there's a lot of balancing that will go into that. But I'll talk about it a little more under a different document heading. Location of dumpsters, trash receptacles, and plans for collection. They have submitted a plan for a dumpster enclosure. It would be in the area furthest south off the paving, on the paving, furthest south from the lounge building. Okay, I'll give you a look at that plan. That's what the enclosure will look like. It will be on concrete. The dumpster is right here.
Yep.
Yes. It's called out on one of these sheets that is the dumpster location. Shifting over to landscaping plans. There've been a few permutations of it. As far as the first plan went that you saw with the original proposal, I felt that it didn't do enough to provide that. Again, there are two thresholds to meet. One is the 1 tree, 2 shrubs per 1,000 square feet of green space, if the planning commission desires to invoke that full number. But the other is that the planning commission is entitled to request plantings as screening for adverse effects of the development on, potential adverse effects on the surrounding area. So bearing those things in mind, Jamin has come back with a plan late this afternoon, actually, that was done at my request after we had a chance to discuss his other version from a few weeks ago. The concerns with the other version were that a lot of the landscaping that was shown was off, not a lot of it, but a share of it was located off property. And he would have had to secure easements over those property areas to ensure that the condominium association can, for all time, get in and maintain those plants and replace them if they die and make sure that that care is given. It's not required that they go off-site to do their landscaping, and so Jamin's feeling is that he would prefer to do it internally on the site itself. So to that end, I've got a new landscaping plan that was submitted late today that I don't expect the commission to be able to, to provide a knee-jerk response to, but we will gladly work through it at staff level with him. So what this plan does, there was a bunch of landscaping on a berm out in this area that isn't real estate that the applicant even owns. And so it's risky for him to propose something off premises. What he's doing is bringing in plantings right up close to the buildings. We've got this 20-foot setback area. He's going to be putting in some spruce, some serviceberry, some white pines, some serviceberry again, and more Black Hills spruce on this very sensitive east side of the buildings where there's high exposure to the surrounding neighborhood.
So that's going to be down underneath the berm between the buildings and the west side of the berm?
It will be right alongside the east sides of the building.
And nothing will be done with the berms?
Well, no, not as part of this, but the
not part of
berms are
this
off
development.
premises.
That's what we talked about. That was something we're gonna have to handle based on the agreement that we have privately with Jamin and Extreme. The planning commission and the board can't request or require him to plant anything on the berm that's technically on our property.
Yeah.
We can only enforce what's within his building profile.
Then why bother putting trees and stuff down low where it's not going to be seen by anybody? It will be on the back side of the buildings.
Initially, the trees might not be seen as much because they'll be smaller, but ultimately, these are spruce and things that are gonna grow to how tall do they get?
Spruce,
Yeah, these Black Hills.
35 feet.
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, the long term, there's gonna provide more
Over a
shielding.
period of 50 years, 75
Whatever
years?
that,
Spruce grow pretty quick.
Well, the building height over here is about 26 feet to the peak. Is that about right?
Yes.
Okay. Is that the building height for all the buildings,
Yes,
Jamin?
everyone's
Yes.
exactly the same.
Okay. So that building height, that's to the peak of these buildings. So if you're putting in, 6-foot spruce on these back walls, what's the wall height?
16 feet.
16 feet.
Well, it's like 16, 16
Yeah,
feet.
16.
Okay. So typically, we would call that, the correct landscaping posture as a screening plan for the backside of a building wall. But again, this is the planning commission's to discuss and decide. It's not mine. The one thing I noticed was that we did not have a lot of trees on the north side. There is some good dogwood plantings right up tight against the building walls again. And that's kind of a nice feature to sort of offset the appearance for neighboring property owners of those steel buildings. So there's a couple of trees, some good maples here, and then there's dogwoods all the way along each of these north building elevations. What isn't obstructed, that's conspicuous to me, and I'd love to see like a grouping of white pine, is each of one of these gaps, so that neighbors aren't looking right down the runway here.
Well, we did that for plow purposes. You can't put it, that's the only place to push snow on the property.
Oh, okay.
So
See.
by pushing snow into a landscape, you're gonna be ruining it every year and they'll be dead.
Okay.
So there's a thought behind that.
All right. So I bring those points up for discussion, and some feedback from the commission would be great, so that we ensure that we get a decent final plan worked out at staff level before it all comes back to you in its final version. The south side, seems to be pretty well thought out. Up tight against the building, they have these maiden grass, which are a very tall grass, which again gives some break up there. There's a couple of decent sized spruce and deciduous trees mixed in as well. Okay.
From a landscape view, that's a lot of plant material in a small space.
Other points on the landscaping, that was it. Everything that was off-site is now on-site. Architectural plan review comments, must have 50% masonry all the way around. Plan shows wainscot height masonry veneer on 3 sides of the lounge building, but that's it. So in the village's code, where we talk about that, 50% masonry is required because this is a B zoning district. It's one of the business districts, B1, 2, 3, 4. In the industrial district, we have a lesser requirement for brick material. It's got to be on the street-facing side, just wainscot height, and it has to just turn the corners a bit on each of the non-street-facing elevations. Nothing on the rear. Here we say that it has to be 50% masonry all the way around. What their plan shows and what the code says is that the planning commission can approve an alternate material to your satisfaction. I'm going to read you the section correctly so that you can make the best informed decision about that. The detailed architectural standards say that in commercial districts, 50% of all building exteriors shall be brick, decorative masonry, glass panel, or other appropriately finished facade as may be approved by the Planning Commission. So the question is, okay, or other appropriately finished facade as may be approved by the Planning Commission. The question is, with respect to this architectural concept, where they're putting in a wainscot level change in terms of the type of metal panel, and I think we have the examples here from last time this was presented. But they would be changing the color and the type of ribbon in the panel at that wainscot height. And so that's what they're asking the Planning Commission to approve under that provision in the code that I just read to you. Okay? So we'll need feedback on that to make sure we can memorialize the Commission's wishes in the final version of plans that will come back to you. Then, with respect to The lounge buildings and facilities, are they owner-tenant benefit exclusively? The answer is yes. Do we need materials and color specs and samples for all sides of the building? They are pending. I believe the brick sample was going to be brought tonight.
I forgot to grab it.
Okay, can still come back at a subsequent meeting.
Mhm.
Overall building heights from grade need to be specified, that's been done. Other plan review comments, at what stage of completion will each of the buildings be allowed occupancy? I'm going to defer discussion on these till I'm under a different document heading. Permitted uses, we went through that and there are no changes there. Permitted hours of operation, what has been proposed as a part of staff and applicant discussions is 24-hour, 7 days a week access to the pure storage uses and the hobbyist enthusiast type uses. Trade and contractors hours will be per whatever plan of operations they get approved by this planning commission. But then a provision here that would say no noise can be emanating beyond the lot lines from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. daily. Okay? So if that's satisfactory to the commission, that's what we're memorialized. Occupancy is not permitted, that's under a different document. It's condominium, we get that in another document. Needing the title report to confirm status of ownership as to all the properties involved and including the easement areas. Again, that is being worked through between the attorneys. Provision number 8, we addressed. Number 9, no porta-johns would be allowed on the project except during active construction and then in close proximity to the active construction. So no porta-johns up on the north end to simplify the run down to the lounge, that kind of thing. HVAC boxes, we would put a provision in the final document that would say when the final locations for HVAC boxes and similar appurtenance that end up on the landscape are known, that they would be, if they are visible to the surrounding view, the plan to screen those would be worked out between staff and the applicant. Okay? So that's the end of the staff report, and what I'll tell you is that as we've worked through the various documents and the terms of this approval, kind of at staff level, on the advice of the village attorney, would be advisable to strike, it's not a development agreement in the purest sense that you're used to it, meaning there aren't any public improvements being built here that we're going to review, approve, and accept as our public improvements, and that's typically what the development agreement captures. In this case, what our development agreement is going to do is commemorate every one of the plan sheets. So the final plan sheets will all be exhibited as attachments to this development agreement and deed restriction. And it will also memorialize all the terms of the approval, all the conditions of the approval. And so I'm going to open that document and run through for you just kind of where the working draft is at right now. I'll try not to be redundant about things we've already gone through. But I want the commission to understand that that's a document that we're going to work on preparing. It's already, like I said, in substantial draft form. But that, with all of the final plans and the final terms, will come back to this commission for a final review and approval. So I think tonight what we need is all of your important decision-making about what you want to see in terms of the landscaping, the architecture, all of those details, so that we can commemorate that properly into this final document with the final exhibits. Yeah.
I late this afternoon, a little before 4 p.m., I received the title documents, and we had a chance to look at them. And the document that you're going to look at in a minute is intended to be recorded in the Register of Deeds office. So it's going to be a forever document that's going to set the restrictions and use and other conditions for any subsequent owner.
Right.
And this will all be part of the document that will come back in its final form for our review and everything before it's memorialized, correct?
Yep. Yep. So we would like to leave here tonight, though, knowing what your expectations are as to all of those final documents, so that we understand. what these pictures are gonna look like, okay? The site plan and so forth. Architectural building plans, all of those details. So this is there an easy way to merge this, Kelly?
Bottom right. Bottom right's a little slider bar.
Oh, good.
Kick that right. Oh, yeah.
All right. So this is the draft of an agreement, and again, it is just a draft. And there's a lot of work to be done on it yet, but I want you to understand it. So attached Exhibit A would be the condominium site plan. Let's see here. Development project known as Lake Park Storage Condominiums, more particularly described in Exhibit A. That would be the condominium declaration, the condominium plat, and the covenants and restrictions will be exhibited as well. I'll keep rolling down here. So what it basically says is, paragraph 1, the certified survey map is attached to this document. I have to slide out a little bit. Okay, the certified survey map will be attached as Exhibit B, made a part of this document. The 30-foot wide easement commemorating the ingress-egress for emergency purposes, with the village as the beneficiary of that easement, is attached as a part of, and the 60-foot wide easement extending south of Edgewood Avenue are memorialized in the CSM and attached as exhibits to this document. Okay? So you will see those by the time this comes back. It shouldn't come back until we have those as exhibits to the document, okay? Project construction can't begin until the developer establishes an escrow account or a letter of credit for 120% of the costs to complete various improvements. And those would include, for instance, grading and stabilization of the project area, raise and removal of all the existing structures and other materials that are stored outdoors on the site, erosion control installation, construction of the private street, completion of the project area landscaping, and the stormwater management pond and the facilities related to the pond. Paving would also be in there if I didn't say it already. So that's a provision. It requires that the developer secure the estimates to complete all that work. The village engineer has an opportunity to approve those cost estimates, and a bond basically is set up to ensure that the work gets done. Progressively, as the work gets done, the developer can request drawdowns off that. Unless specifically approved by the village or the owner, applicant agrees or the developer agrees that it won't sell, transfer, or otherwise convey any individual condominium unit until, as to phase 1, which is buildings 1, 2, and 4, all of the following improvements have been made. And so with respect to phase 1, and again, this may be improved upon, it may be expanded upon, this list, but I want you to understand that we are developing this list of things that must be completed before phase 1 can be conveyed in ownership, okay? And for instance, that includes soil sampling, completion of the private street out to Edgewood, completion of the emergency egress out to 164, septic system and well being installed, all paving shown in the phase 1 paving boundary. So that boundary is not shown yet on the site plan, but it will be when this comes to you in final form. Project area, all the project area landscaping. The applicant is asking us to dial that back a little bit rather than having to put all the landscaping in right away. We'd like to defer some of that because they feel they might damage it when they construct the subsequent phase buildings. So we'll work that out at staff and come back with a final draft of this for you to consider. All stormwater management facilities located within and under the phase 1 paving area boundary, and that includes the pond, need to be constructed. And again, we're talking about phase 1. And then we have a listing here given to us from the developer about anticipated completion dates Building 1, June 2021, Building 2, July 2021, Building 4, September 2021. Now, I won't labor through that same conversation about Phase 1B, but we have a Phase 1B, that's Buildings 3 and 5, and here's a listing that will be modified, expanded upon, worked out at staff level and brought back to you in the final document with all the exhibits. Tells what must be done before you can convey ownership of those buildings or any units in them. Same thing for Phase 2, same thing for Phase 3. All these things that need to be completed. You can see that Phase 3 is the final phase, and what they're showing is an anticipated completion for the last building, Building 11, by September 2023. Paragraph 8, all buildings have to be constructed in accordance with the approved architectural plans. We have those from the original visit. We'll see, what the conclusion is as to those designs and incorporate it as an exhibit to this document. Same thing with landscaping under paragraph 9. Permitted uses are memorialized here. And I won't go through those again because the commission seemed comfortable with those when we came forward 2 months ago, and the applicant is comfortable with them as well. Human habitation and keeping of animals on this property are expressly prohibited at this site. So there's something that we're adding that we've kind of worked through at staff level. And I've gone through this with the developer, and they had no concern about that kind of condition. Permitted hours, we just talked about that. Porta-johns not permitted. Occupancies are not permitted, which may cause any adverse impacts upon the surrounding area or village as a whole, such as noise, odor, traffic, litter, loitering, and similar. Okay? The owner agrees it won't start Phase 1B, Phase 2, or 3 development improvements unless it requests and receives approval in writing from the village to initiate each one of those phases. And by requiring that, we ensure that the village has a chance to make certain that the previous phases work is all complete before we let another phase or another building begin. Other conditions, we're just leaving room for some development here. Village has no responsibility to construct any of the improvements on the plans. Talks about drawing down the escrow as the developer does complete those improvements. Written consent from the village, I guess I was redundant there. This agreement is deemed a covenant running with the land. It will get recorded. It's binding on the developer and eventually the successors to the developer, which would be the condo association. And that's it. So that's where I'm going to let off. I'm sorry I was so windy about it, but I want you to understand the framework and where we're at on all these various plans. I'll let Naomi pick up and run the code review of the construction details and the stormwater management issues, the soil testing, all of those kinds of stuff.
So you've gotten updates periodically throughout with the engineering review and approval. I have a recommendation for approval for the current site plan that was submitted, contingent upon conditions. And the conditions will be memorialized in this deed restriction developer's agreement deed restriction document moving forward. The first one is the soil sampling and analysis that must be conducted within the footprint of the proposed basin. This was a recommendation from our environmental engineer report and discussed with the applicant and agreed upon with the applicant. This testing would allow for testing within the basin location, which is the deepest part of excavation. And it borders along the landfill site. So our environmental engineer, I hope that I last minute included, that I included my environmental review that was put together by Travis Peterson. I hope everyone got that. This is his words, and I basically took some of his wording to put it in as my conditions, but Travis had reviewed the storage, Big Ben self-storage site plan. He looked at the NR 716 site investigation work that was done by PSI, dated December 6th of 2019. In his review, he reviewed a correspondence from the town of Vernon and the Natural Resource Department, Department of Natural Resources related to this site that was dated December 20th of 2019. He also looked at the DNR website, anything that was on file, the BRRTS case file information for the adjacent landfill. He talked and looked directly at the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources correspondence that gave an indication that they had no concerns related to the road being built on the landfill site to get access to the condo property. He also talked directly to the Wisconsin DNR representative to understand that they were looking at the same set of plans, they were talking about the same site, there was mutual understanding. And then he also reviewed a data review summary prepared by RSB Engineering that was dated April 28th, 2005, and several update status reports. So in part of his review, he essentially agreed or will follow the DNR recommendation that that there is no adverse impacts of the road being proposed on the site. He did reference the location of the waste mass boundary that was shown to extend right up to the property line on one of the reports, and that the proposed roadway would be crossing that line. However, the DNR did not think that there was an unapproved, sorry, let me see here. The access road entering the development for Edgewood Avenue will be installed within the delineated waste mass and will be constructed partially over the top of an existing road. DNR understands this and gave their confirmation. Let's see. He does, number 4 of the letter, Travis did recommend that as contaminant impacts have been identified at the northwest corner of the landfill site that are within close proximity to the storage condo type units of the development, and that the development plans call for the construction of a retention basin along the west property line of the landfill. We believe that soil sampling and analysis be conducted within the footprint of the basin at 3 locations and also within the blueprint of the 2 closest storage condo units to the identified contamination. So the 2 storage condo units would be constructed as part of phase 2 or 3. And the basin must be constructed as part of phase 1 of the development. And so that kind of explains why I have a couple of conditions in my report. The contaminants, the soil analysis to be conducted would profile the soils for potential contaminant impacts, including VOCs, metals, PAHs, stemming from historic landfill and subject site usage that would allow for proper disposal of the waste soils produced. And methane testing from the soil boring completion is also recommended to rule out potential risk from vapor intrusion. So what the thought is here is to do some testing on this development site. We ask that in my condition for approval that Kapoor gets a chance to look at the results of the site on behalf of the village. Look at the results of the testing and, sort of verify what is the results of the testing, what is being done with the soil from the pond, where is it being placed, and is it appropriate? And that I will defer to Travis Peterson from our environmental office when that happens. So kind of going back to my recommendations, number 1 is kind of reiterating Travis's recommendation for the sampling within the basin. As part of that condition, the results of the analysis shall be provided to the village for review. Proper disposal of excavated soils based on the results is required. Additional environmental mitigation may be required in the case of the testing results determine if contaminants are present. I don't know what that would be because I don't know what is out there, but I wanted to add that so that we are covered and can take a look at it. Number 2, the private street off Edgewood Avenue may be temporarily constructed in the location shown on the site plan. So this is the access road coming off Edgewood. There is existing gravel there. It's essentially a road, and it will be placed pretty close to the existing road. There's some areas that's slightly off. The request from the applicant was to not put on the asphalt lifts until they are further along in the development phases. However, we wanted to make sure it was a safe road for the occupants of the first buildings that would be put in phase 1. So with discussion of the public works superintendent, and I agreed that if the road was put in temporarily with the a minimum of 8-inch concrete base and some recycled asphalt layers and the 3-foot shoulder, so essentially would be constructed without the binder and surface course of asphalt until 75% of the development has been completed, but no later than September 1st of 2024. The existing private drive off Big Bend should be maintained. So now I'm talking about the one off of Big Bend Road right here. This is, if you recall, is an emergency exit or entrance for emergency personnel. We wanted to make sure that this road was maintained at a minimum width of 24 feet. For the existing gravel base, this road is accessible by easement, so it's not part of the property. And that the ingress egress is controlled for emergency access only as outlined in our development agreement. I did see correspondence from Wisconsin DOT that they have confirmed that they're okay with this new plan, because they did have some concerns when we were going to take ingress egress solely off of this point. So they're okay with the gate. They specifically said they're okay with the gate. They're okay with emergency access. Condition number 4 is prior to preparing the building pads for buildings 10 and 11. These are the ones that border the lot line with the landfill property. Prior to preparation, though, soil sampling and analysis must be conducted in the footprint of those buildings, looking for the same contaminants as we would in the basin, and methane vapor testing. This is recommended to be held off until the development of that phase, because then you get a real-time record of what is out there. So while we talked about doing it initially at the same time as the basin, it was agreed upon that we could wait if this was a phase development and do it as part of that phase prior to construction. Number 5, the proposed private road from Edgewood Avenue shall be marked with the village installed street sign at the intersection of the private street and Edgewood Avenue. A name for the private street has not yet been determined, but I believe it needs approval by village staff and maybe the board.
Well, it's a private street, so I don't know that it has to be approved by the village,
Okay.
but it does need to be reported to the village for public safety.
And then the street signs must be installed prior to issuance of any occupancy permits. So if there is an emergency call, they know where to go. Number 6, a copy of the final construction plans and stormwater management plan or report must be signed and sealed by a PE. That's just standard. Copy of all the well and septic approvals of permits from the county or state must be provided to the village. We did this new site plan shows the location of the septic and wells on the properties just outside of this, to the south where the residential properties are. And so we verified setback from the proposed stormwater basin and their proposed well and septic location. which will also be sent to the county and state for approval. So we did get that information since the last time you have seen it on the site plan. Again, I'm reiterating the fact that a performance bond is required. We get a line item of all the items to review and concur on the cost, and then as development occurs and is functioning, we can issue a request to draw down on the letter of credit can be requested by the developer and then reviewed and approved by city staff, and then they can slowly get it down to whatever's left for the last phase. And then stormwater facility as-built information is required to be reviewed and approved. So we will need as-built information to ensure the pond is constructed per plan. The stormwater maintenance agreement, we have a signed stormwater maintenance agreement that will be part of the developer's agreement. It will be one of the exhibits. And it talks about how to maintain and take care of the stormwater maintenance facility, and it also gives the village leverage in emergencies to go in and make changes and basically charge back to the condo association or the owner if those changes need to be made. Pretty standard. It has to be recorded with the Walworth County, and we will do that. Oh my gosh. Thank you. Waukesha County.
I made that note too. I was like, why am I looking for Walworth?
Oh my gosh. Thank you.
We knew what you meant.
Yeah, okay. With the county. Okay, Waukesha County. We can facilitate recording of that document, and there's some other things with the CSM and that probably need to happen first, but I have a signed copy from the developer already for the stormwater maintenance agreement. And then a pre-construction meeting will be required prior to construction. The village engineer should be notified at least a week in advance to facilitate attendance at that pre-construction meeting. We discuss the logistics of the project. This project in particular has a few more items that need to be done in a certain order. We would go through that. We would talk about the village's role in its inspection of construction with the pond and the liner and the outlet and some of the roadway construction criteria. So that essentially is where I am on my engineering review.
I think I was the tail on the line in this whole effort. Mary took the labor and war on that development agreement and did a really good job, and Naomi and Mary both spent a huge amount of time on it. The legal issues have a lot fewer. But this is a unique development, I think, for all of us. To my knowledge, it's the first condo development in the village and not the typical residential type of condo development. So it's not that the issues are that complex, but there's just a lot of loose ends to try to tie down. So I think that the purpose of bringing you up to date was to solicit your thoughts on that, any things that should be considered further to be included in the development agreement or otherwise.
So for my part, if you wouldn't mind taking up the discussion about the landscaping plan, the architectural plan. The site plan really hasn't changed except for those parking stalls being added between the buildings, and the green space it took away still leaves the site in a positive condition as far as green space required overall in the development. So those things can be probably captured into the plans and made a part of an exhibit to this document before we come back to it. And then Naomi, if you have any other.
Yeah, I think this might be the first time you were provided with the environmental review comments. If you have any questions, I did ask Travis Peterson to attend the meeting, he's on vacation. You know, if leaving for vacation tonight, so if there are some questions, I can try to get feedback for you or answer if I can't answer them, or we could ask for him to attend if there's another transfer session.
But can I just ask for clarification? I understand that the testing work was done at the pond location?
The testing was done last Monday, and I talked to Pat Patterson yesterday, and he expected the results to be in either tomorrow or Monday, and he would send those over immediately.
Okay. So if those results came back clear, or if they came back suggesting that there is some contamination, then what we learn is that either there's nothing that holds up the construction of that pond, or there's going to be some provisions for where that excavated material is going to go as it comes out as a part of the construction of the pond. So your environmental folks are putting together the report and sharing that over to Naomi for their environmental folks to review and approve.
Correct. As soon as he gets the raw data, he's gonna send that over, and then following the next day, he will create his report and send that over to Kapoor for their review.
Okay. So then the only other testing that will be done will be before the construction of buildings 10 and 11. And that will be to ensure that whatever the status of decomposition in the landfill is and the methane gases that travel off of that can be discovered at that moment in time. So when there's going to be some excavation happening, that's when the testing is recommended to be done by.
And that's more the snapshot in time where we say, if you do it right now and it's 2 years into your phasing that those buildings go up, okay, if you test it now, who's to say the tests are still valid 2 years from now?
Yes,
So
things
that's-
change.
Yeah, okay. No, that makes sense.
So PSI Intertech took the samples?
Correct.
All right. Were they taking it grade or were they taking down like towards the bottom of
We did a test as deep as the deepest part of the retention pond went,
Okay.
so.
All right. And 3 separate places?
3 separate locations per your recommendation, I believe.
Kapoor, PSI provided a scope for Kapoor to review. And a location map of like where the testing would be done for Kapoor to look at prior to.
I'm assuming it's targeting the east line of it?
Yes,
The
it was
closest
all
side,
within-
the closest side of.
Yes.
Yes, the
Land-
3 right in the
landfill.
basin, they showed the location, they had done prior soil sampling. You know, I thought I printed that out, the location there.
No, but I can see it here on this map. It's small. Test pit locations.
We did 3 prior test pits
Oh, there it is, yeah.
in the vicinity of the retention pond 2 weeks prior.
Yeah.
That was when you were testing for perk stuff, right?
Correct.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's why it
There
was
was
different.
no
It wasn't
specific-
soil testing, it was testing
No.
filtration.
No, there was no I guess the results of that report, as told to me by the Kapoor environmental engineer, was that there was no evidence of fill in that area.
It was completely virgin soil, and we
At
went
the
down.
time of the percolation test soil pits, and now there's 3 additional, right, so 5 total in that area. 3 will be environmentally tested.
All right. So at the stormwater pond, is it okay for me to start asking some questions?
I'm done.
Okay. All right. And some of this kind of circles back around to different aspects of things, but I'll start off with the sampling and stuff. How deep is the stormwater pond at the deepest point?
I believe it's like 7.5 feet.
Yeah, I can't see it on the map, but I have, and I apologize for that. 7.5, so it's like less than 10?
Yes,
Okay, all right. Did you have any groundwater whenever you were taking the samples there? Okay.
nothing. And we went down, when we did the perk test, we actually went down as deep as my machine would go. It was, I think, close to 14 feet.
In that area? Did you get any groundwater?
It was
at that time?
100% virgin soil, no groundwater.
Groundwater.
He actually let the pit sit for about an hour.
So, I guess start off talking about the stormwater pond. This would be a good, inlet to that. So, the plans were originally for infiltration. Infiltration, I think, was ruled out, so, because of the soil conditions, was that correct?
I
The
believe when
infiltration
you
ponds?
dig down to the depth, I have to look back at the soil report, that infiltration would be available, however, we did not think it acceptable for this project site to infiltrate the stormwater due to the location of the landfill.
Because
So
of
it's-
potential contamination.
Yeah, I mean, that was based on just my,
Yeah.
you know, it's a wet bottom basin, put a liner in it. It still provides the water quality and stormwater treatment.
Okay.
Let's not worry about additional infiltration due to the location of the pond.
All right, so the first thing to talk about with the stormwater discharge, I noticed instead of just a simple weir over the side, basically, there's a weir system going to be installed. It's going to run into a pipe, and then the pipe is going to be run onto the landfill site by 50 to 75 feet, it looks like, for discharge.
Yeah, that's what the plan shows.
Okay, so a couple of questions about that. First of all, that pipe, I'm assuming is going to have to be buried
Yeah.
to
Up to an
create
extent.
to an extent, and then it would also have to have soil removed in order to put in a riprap basin where it's going to be discharged. So there will be soil disturbances in the landfill area whenever that occurs.
For the pipe and the road is how it's proposed.
Right, and the discharge area too. For the,
Yeah.
like the riprap, the
That's
basin
correct.
for that, right? Okay. Has there been any soil testing done in that area to show if the pipe and the discharge spot, the effluent riprap can be installed?
Just previous testing.
Like what? I don't know of anything that was done in that area.
Yeah, no.
Okay. The next question I have on that is, from the discharge, there was a lot of study done on the collection of the stormwater and the stormwater basin and stuff like that, and it was very, very thorough. But it basically left off whenever the stormwater would be discharged. So my next question is, with the pipe, the 12-inch pipe that's coming out, where is that water going to go from there? Because it looks like it's going to be trapped in by the road and potentially circle back around and basically wind up in the adjoining homeowner's backyard.
The pipe discharge should go, this is our grading plan.
Yep.
This is a low point here, so it goes, this is the existing path of flow. So when water drains this way now,
Sure.
it goes some here, some along here, comes into, and I think there's actually kind of a low spot here in this lot,
Okay.
which, so preferable to not put the water right into a low spot. This drains this way, there's no culvert under here, so this will be at existing grade when it matches in here.
So you're saying it's going to go out to the road?
It
and
goes
then
out to the
pass
road and then it goes,
onto the road and then back over
and then
again?
further this way.
Okay. All right, because I looked at that, and it really looks like it's pitched more towards the backyard of that adjoining homeowner, the home,
The Vernon property on the corner.
yeah, exactly.
This one over here?
It'd be the first house west of the entrance.
Yeah, he's low. He's lower than this spot.
Yeah.
So,
So wouldn't the water just naturally run over that direction? Especially if we have like a 2-year, 5-year, 10-year.
no, it should go this way first. This contour ties in. I mean, I should let the applicant reply, but
I'm looking at the topo on the screen up there.
Oh, there you go. I was wondering if we had it
So
up.
the discharge is at 828, and then we've got 827.8 here, and 827.6 here.
Mhm.
This topo line is 829.
wraps
So
around.
there's a
Yeah,
high line that cuts through right here.
yeah.
Okay.
So
And it
that's,
go-
that
and
should-
it runs down the property line, yeah.
so essentially it's set to be slightly lower than that ridge on both sides. On the west,
Yes.
which would be that residential property
Yeah.
where he was concerned
And
about,
then-
and on the north.
And then the roadway overtops at 828 something right here.
828.
Yeah, 828 2. That would be the final grade here.
So it's
So
gonna,
it should go that way, still
so it's
continue.
gonna initially pool, and then it should, even though that we don't see the topos on
Yes,
this, onto the west side, it should,
Continue on
hypothetically
its
saying,
way,
continue
yes.
on its way to the east.
yes.
Okay. And then from the east, is it designed so that it would roll down, because there's not really a ditch line along the sidewalk there? Or is it going to curtail back in towards the landfill?
The natural watershed is to the southeast already.
So it would
Cherry.
go- so it would go across Edgewood?
It goes the same
Yes.
way it would go now.
Yeah, so
So
it
all
goes
the
ultimately
discharge-
leading towards Cherry
Yeah.
and, ultimately further south, it matches up with like Fox River or what have you,
Yeah.
right? That's how the natural flow is today.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
which is where all the Lake Park water access goes,
I guess what-
everything moves in that same
Yeah,
direction.
so I guess in that fashion then, do we have to be concerned about any discharge water going across Edgewood? Because there's no culvert pipe or anything.
Yeah, there's a culvert pipe in it.
But that's
There's
north.
a low area to the
Yeah,
to the
that's,
east.
oh, I'm sorry, east, yeah, that's east of where this would be coming across the road.
I didn't identify, or our environmental person didn't identify any concerns. I mean, with the stormwater going,
Well, I'll go back and I'll reiterate the point about the fact that there will be disturbed soils, there will be a riprap basin put in, I'm assuming at least a couple, 3 feet down. My concern is that you're now disturbing soils and contaminants. My other concern with that too, just kind of rolling through stuff here, do we need an easement for that pipe and discharge? Because it's going to be on adjacent
yes,
property?
that's a good point, yes, we do. It happens, it happens to be owned by the same person right now, but yes, we should have a stormwater easement. That, yes, we should do that.
Formally, it needs to be recorded.
We need to add that, yes.
Alright,
Yes.
so contamination on the stormwater discharge, disturbing the soils, and making sure that there's easement for the
Yep, that's a good one.
Alright, so going back to stormwater, just talking about the fact that stormwater is going to be collected off of impervious surfaces. One of my concerns that I brought up before is that once you install impervious surfaces, which there's roughly about 3.75 acres in this development, you're going to have a substantial effect on the groundwater recharge that would be normally had by that rainwater coming in, and is no longer going to percolate down through, wetting the soils, and eventually get down into groundwater. So my concern with that, I've looked up and discussed with a couple of colleagues of mine, and the concern is that soil, it's like dewatering the soil. Whenever you dewater the soil, there's naturally going to be other wetness, other liquid, other water coming in to replace that no longer comes down from the top. So with that in effect, and I was hoping that this would be somewhat addressed by reporters look at things, I question, where is that water, that liquid going to come from? Is it going to come from the east, from the landfill side, or is it going to come from other surrounding properties? And my concern is, again, that there's identified liquid contamination, 48 inches of it at least, in the northwest corner of the landfill lot. And if you start dewatering, if you start basically affecting the groundwater recharge and the hydraulics of the whole system, is that going to start drawing that contamination? Because it's, again, one of the reasons that infiltration was not done on the stormwater pond is the fact that the soil is too loose. It's basically very sandy and just light rock in that area. So water and any other liquid is going to move very readily to try to recapture and equalize out the hydraulics of the entire system. That's one of my concerns, and I don't see that there's been any look at that, and I think that that's something critical that we need to consider so that we're not allowing that contamination to spread outward. So basically by putting an impervious surface and collecting that as groundwater, discharging it, and it's going to go off-site for the majority of that and not permeate back through to the landfill or collectively add back into the water. It's going to have a very short retention time on top of the landfill and then go across Edgewood and be gone. We're not going to get recharge from rainwater anymore. Okay? So that's one of my concerns on that. Let's see. So with that in mind as well, just soil sampling in general, I understand that the soil sampling has been done. Are we going to want to go ahead and sample where 10 and 11 is in anticipation of any methane, any VOCs, any metals, or anything of that nature? I guess I'm questioning why there would be reluctance to go ahead and sample that entire lot line to get an idea if there is any contamination. Because if we start building and we allow, 3 phases? So if we allow
Over
phase
2
1
years'
and
time.
2
Yeah, or
to
there's
go
a
in
one,
before
Like a
one,
1B.
2, and 3.
Yeah, so we wouldn't sample 10 and 11 through that area, which is again very close to the critical known uncontrolled hazardous waste in the ground location. If we don't sample there and we find out that there's been intrusion, migration over to that property, We may have existing structure, including asphaltic surfaces or buildings that are already in place and are now going to have to be potentially raised, or substantial disruption to everything that's going on without knowing that there is contamination over there. It kind of leads into the effect that what I saw from Kapoor is basically hold on here, it's a data review, and it wasn't necessarily what would be considered a phase 1 assessment or any suggestions on moving to a phase 2 assessment. Usually phase 1, phase 2 is a real estate involved, and I started delving into that a little bit. My question is, I don't know why there wasn't a phase 1 done when we started looking at the CSM. Because part of federal law under, I think it's 40 CFR 312, is that you have to, anytime that there's property change, including something that I think CSM and the combination of those 3 properties would trigger the effect of looking at the overall potential contamination for that site. There's other things there besides the landfill coming in on it. I believe that there's still an underground storage tank on that site.
What's that?
I believe there's still an underground storage tank on that site, isn't there?
There was never an underground storage tank.
There, one time was 3 of them. It was in the Graf Anhalt Schlamer stuff, their report from back in early 2000s. 2 of those were removed from an old gas station, or just simply gasoline, leaded gasoline tanks, and I think a diesel tank. But they had mentioned that there's a 3rd tank under there. They had found contamination from the 2, leading into contamination of the 2 wells that are on that site. But I didn't see anything addressed through Kapoor on contamination that was already previously on that site. They found lead, they found gasoline range organics in the soils, in the water testing from the 2 wells. They smelled stuff in the soil, but no further testing was done on the soils at that time. So I guess, and again, phase 1 is to not just protect the village and the people that live around, but it's also to protect the developer, to make sure that they're not overstepping and getting into something where it's going to have to be reversed to try to fix what's underneath. It might be somewhat affected by the landfill, but it also might be stuff that's currently on that site too. So my recommendation back is that we need to take a further look at doing an actual phase 1 assessment that then can be legally put into place to protect the developer, the landowner, the village of Vernon, all the citizens that live around there. Basically, it gives you, it's a clause that says that now you've taken a look at it, and it gives you a little bit of indemnification for future things that may happen or be discovered. Okay.
What's involved in the phase 1 assessment?
So phase 1 is somewhat of what they've already done, which is a review of historical data and things of that nature, but then it comes out with a list of recommendations, usually followed up by at least some sampling. It may just simply be that sampling along the lot line, but it also might be groundwater sampling. By the way, another thing I wanted to talk about was the well. I'm sure there's gonna have to be a variance on the well done through the DNR, and that's just simply paperwork. But I think that it would be adequate to say that those wells that have not been tested in the past 20+ years, we need to go back and retest those wells and see if there's any effect with the groundwater before the expense of putting in another well that may or may not be able to be used. Because there's no contamination with the 2 wells that are on site right now. And all that was back in the assessment paperwork that Mr. Peterson produced to us after the January 28th meeting. So.
Yeah, I would agree that Kapoor, and maybe that was my misunderstanding of Rose Road, but we did not, you're right, we did not do a phase 1 assessment.
Okay.
We took some data, talked with the DNR to ensure compliance. I wish Travis was here to, speak to some of your questions. He may have had conversations with PSI, I think, that I'm not privy to. I'm sorry, I can't answer those questions.
And yeah, so Kelly, to your point too, phase 1 also looks at future impacts. So it doesn't just look at what happened in the past, it doesn't look at just the conditions that's happening now, but it looks at future impacts. So, for instance, if this development goes in and is installed completely done within 5 years, Jamin, I think you're looking at something like that. Whatever it might be, let's say that nothing is done with that landfill. It gets tied up in you know, whatever, if it's litigation or anything else, or it's just nothing is done with that, and on year 6, there's encroachment that comes in on that, then that would be identified through a phase 1 assessment. So that would give protection to the current landowners, well, at least on the landowner side on the condominiums, not necessarily on the landfill side. It would give indemnification basically back to the villages, to people that have adjacent properties. It gives that traceability back through federal law. Okay? So that kind of takes care of a little bit on the soil sampling. It looked like the soil sampling was actually identified by Travis Peterson more so for soil disposal, but then you kind of tagged on a little bit about, you know, if they find something, then it's a little bit more mitigation may have to happen.
Yeah.
My concern is that at that point, it might be too late to try to do further mitigation, or it may drive other effects to the project before it can move on. That's, you know, that critical timeline. I just really think that that phase 1 is what needs to happen. It was identified back in January, and I really do think that that's something that needs to progress with this. Moving on from that, we talked quite a bit about, you know, the DNR gave its blessing on formulating the road through the landfill. And I'm really happy to see that they went back and talked to the DNR again about that. And the DNR said, hey, we're not too concerned if it disturbs a little bit of the capped area past where the existing road occurs. I go back to the questions I asked both in January and in February about the fact that, is there an actual cap on that landfill? I know that verbally there's been yes, and a lot of the data that they mentioned that there's a cap, but I have not seen any evidence that there's an actual cap. And the reason I say that is that we've had a tremendous amount of pits that have been monitoring wells, test pits, and other things that have pierced through the landfill itself to get down to soil and to get to groundwater. And none of those, whenever they look at the stratigraphic columns or the geological effects of everything vertical that they're going down through, they record all that. Every time any environmental effect is done and they dig down through, they record the different layers that they get. So it goes soil, black soil, chert, loam, sandy soil, soily sand, you know, whatever the case might be. But none of those, over 30 different holes have been put into that, and not a single one identified that there's any cap material of effect in there. Where it might be the extents of it or anything else. So my concern is, even though the DNR gave their blessing, the blessing was intent on the fact that there's clay liner, or clay cap on the top of that landfill, or any type of cap, whatever the specifications might be, but we don't know. If there's no cap, that changes quite a bit of different things. The DNR might still bless off on it, but if there's no cap, then that's going to change hydraulics, it's going to affect how the water coming out of the discharge from the stormwater would, retention pond would, wet pond would be affecting it, and so forth and so on. It's all things that we need to consider. I would suggest that we also try to explore to see if we can find if that landfill is capped or not.
I've reached out to Vernon already. They're looking through all the records back, you know, into the early 80s, late 70s, to see what they can find. They would be the municipality of record. We would have just written them a check for 20% of our portion.
Sure. Cool. I mean, the other thing...
We don't have any record of it, unfortunately.
We could go exploring for it too, but there's been a lot of PEs and PGs that have signed off on basically the strat columns that they've recorded down, and again, there's nothing. Not a single one of them have recorded it. So,
Jamie, you're not aware of any documentation that when you guys purchased the land or anything like that? Okay, I just want to make sure and ask.
So, just kind of skipping back to the wells, I talked about DNR variance, but also I have not seen any plan for abandonment of the current well that's inside of the Kwanzaa hut. I mean, we need to address that, because one of the things is, if that's just simply filled in and not done correctly, that becomes an avenue, a pathway for contamination to basically run.
That was discussed as a part of the development agreement.
Yeah, it was included on the site plan that the well would be abandoned, but I haven't seen any documentation, and that would have to go through the state.
Correct.
that gets properly abandoned or evidence of that being included in the development. That's what we would talk.
So right now, there's just a note on the construction plans, which is typically,
Calling it out that it's needed.
that it will be.
So I guess kind of going to the agreement that we're talking about, one of the things that I think is important to include in there is going to be a statement of liability to any successors of the property and easements. So that means, for instance, as we discussed at the last meeting, if something happens down the line in that road that's now a permanent private road that's going to be owned by the condo owners association, has to be physically removed to remediate down underneath it because it is going to be within 5 feet of where known liquid hazardous waste, uncontrolled hazardous waste is located in the ground. If it has to be removed, in order to get to that, to remediate that site, they're going to be responsible for it, and I believe that they need to know that on their agreements.
And there was some discussion about including that in like your condo documentation, association document.
Yep.
But I would also suggest that we put it onto, what,
I defer to the attorney to decide whether that's something
Put in development
we can
agreement.
put into the development agreement, yeah.
because that would also go to all the successors, correct? Everybody that property would be
That's
deeded
what
to in the future?
that's what you're asking it to do, yes.
Yes. So that would be with that, and then, you know, speaking of infrastructure in the future, so if that road has to be taken out for a remedial effect sometime in the future, what's the backup to get people in and out of there?
I talked to the DNR and I asked him worst case scenario and he said, you would never have to rip that road out.
Okay.
Under any circumstances. Worst case scenario for remediation on that site would be to drop in a large scale well, 6-inch, 12-inch well, let those contaminants perk through and then have that pumped out in a tanker. And I brought that up to him specifically for the road, specifically on that site, and he said, again, it could be sunk right on the side of that. I mean, the chances of the target site being directly in the middle of that road is whatever, 1%.
I would highly suggest for you to get that in writing from the DNR, otherwise all it is just talk,
Well, if
honestly.
I have to get everything in writing that you're recommending, I'm gonna be dead before this happens.
I'm just trying to protect everybody's liability.
Mhm.
I think that's it on the environmental side. Yeah, I think so. Two other things I had, I have to look at it. So I noticed on just the general stuff, what about mailboxes? Are they going to receive mail? So there would be no mail? What about package deliveries? I mean, I'm sure they'd have UPS and stuff coming in, right? So is each individual going to hold its own address then?
Mhm.
Okay. Is that something that we need to address? How that's gonna be done for building identification, or?
It's all done in the condo flat.
Right.
I hadn't given that a lot of thought. But yeah, I can imagine, although you are talking about putting up a gate with fob entry access only,
Mhm.
at the east property line at some point in the future, where the road comes in from Edgewood.
Mhm.
So I don't know how that works in terms of mail delivery and whatnot, but gated communities get mail, so, yeah.
Previous developments that I've been involved with, first of all, there's no mailboxes. They get their mail delivered to their home or to their other business. This is for storage. Packages, you arrange with UPS, FedEx, DHL to meet, you know, that's put right in when you order your, whatever it is you're ordering, you know, that it, contact number, blah, 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 30 minutes before arrival, and then they meet you at the gate and they let you in to deliver the package. Or the package gets delivered to your home.
So each of the units will have its own address.
You have it navigated for
And
fire
that will be
purposes.
displayed on the buildings?
You and I talked about that.
Mhm. I'm sorry, what?
Those will be displayed on the buildings?
In the form of like unit numbers, not, an actual address, obviously, so it would be building 1, unit 4, building 2, unit 6, so on and so forth.
But there isn't ultimately going to be an underlying street name that we will know attaches to that.
Correct.
So my next question is about the ingress egress onto Edgewood. Is there any type of traffic study that we need to do for that particular roadway, Edgewood? Because we're going to have now potentially 40 some odd units worth of traffic daily coming in at least twice a day.
Not even close.
No.
Not even close.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, that was DOT, part of the DOT conversation in the very beginning. They had some concern, level of concern. Forget about the easement. We have the easement concerns already going out west towards 164, but DOT also was concerned about the proximity to the intersection and the school, whatever their concerns were. That's what shifted the whole conversation to come off of Edgewood. So you would have assumed if they had any concerns related to traffic study.
And that's in that email.
It would have been, you know.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Yeah.
It triggered whatever, you were talking about the easement onto 164, so.
Mhm.
And that it was resolved because there would be no traffic, and I'm like, well, what about,
Yeah.
do we have to worry about any traffic on Edgewood?
I would just not have contemplated a volume of traffic that would warrant a study based on 40 units where some percentage of those are going to be pure storage. But if the commission feels differently, I'd like you to let us know that. If you feel like we
Kind of
should
been
get a traffic
indifferent
study
with it
going.
myself, I wanted to just bring it up for discussion.
Okay. A question certainly would have come up in our minds too about turning lanes, right? Acceleration, deceleration lanes, and I don't think the warrant for that even comes up as a part of the project.
Okay. Wanted to get a little clarification on phasing for the project. Do we have a sunset date for this entire project to be?
She read that off in that development agreement.
Okay.
2024.
September of 2023 was the end of the last phase.
It's funny if this
We have the
thing
road
started.
thing of the 24, no later than the
Yeah,
24.
September 2024 was the sunset date for the road final lift.
Okay, so
And
2023.
That's assuming it gets started.
So September 2023, okay. All right. Oh, the last thing, and this goes, I don't know where to put this into the conversation, but again, on the ingress egress going out onto Edgewood, there's a sidewalk that goes through there, tremendous amount of kids coming from all the different neighborhoods, channeling down through there to go to the Big Bend Elementary. Just as we look at things into the future on how that road is going to match up, the private road is going to match up to Edgewood, I would really want us to keep that in mind, that there is quite a bit of pedestrian traffic on that sidewalk. We just need to keep things in mind. It kind of goes with the sign conversation too, but
Yeah.
it kind of just goes in for general traffic flow and things of that nature, so.
Would an internal stop sign?
There's one on the plan, is added.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise
There's a
you
stop
can-
sign at the,
Picnic.
You have some
it
pretty
was
good
added
accidents
in
out
the
there.
last.
Crosswalk, there's people there.
Still a safety.
I think you get the kids down there and they park.
Kids on bikes.
Cracking off a crosswalk once it's done is probably your best.
Yeah, there's a stop sign.
I had a question about the masonry.
Mhm.
Asking for the variance for it to be less than the 50% that the current code is.
Mhm.
I'm assuming that's cost savings because I'm assuming masonry is very expensive for 50%.
50% wouldn't even be cost prohibitive.
My only question would be, what projects have we approved in the past here, like maybe within the last 5 years, where we have held to that code and held them to that standard? And would it be perceived negatively if we gave them a variance for that? But someone else 3 years ago that built a building, we required them to do that.
It's not a variance though.
It's not a variance, but it requires planning commission
Correct.
approval. Yeah.
Right.
You see what I'm saying though?
I do.
Like, if someone built a building 3 years ago and we said, hey, you have to do 50%, and now we say, no, you don't,
Well, I think this is a unique situation because for one, everything, it's not on the street, nor is it near any streets.
No, he's industrial.
And it's, most of it's facing inward. And the stuff that will be seen is being heavily, heavily screened by plant material. So to spend that money on masonry that's essentially gonna be covered by plant material anyway, just deems foolish to me.
And that, so the verbiage isn't written that that's a rule, that's the discretion of the planning commission, like Mary hinted at.
Correct.
And because every site plan is so different, like Jamie was saying about his site plan, but then we talk about other plans that also have excessive screening, whether it be through landscaping or fencing, and we've all used that discretion to the same reason, say, why do 50% brick when nobody's gonna see it because you have a fence?
Sure.
You know, so that's why the clarification is it's not a variance, we're not giving a variance, it's discretion based on the site plan and landscaping plan all around.
So I'm just, then I guess I basically would be asking what discretion has the planning commission used in the past for that
We
zoning
don't, we
area?
don't have a lot of history of new construction.
Correct.
Commercial and industrial buildings, so the Rungy building over on Wind Drive, that was an industrial zoning classification. And he met his requirement. The commission exempted him from having to turn the corners and do anything on the sides.
And we exempted him from, or, relieved him from additional landscaping. Remember
Yeah,
that? Because
and
originally
we
there
did.
was some recommendation of planting some additional trees, and we chose, hey, you know what? Based on some of the natural trees that were already there, and the facade of the building, all that, we chose it wasn't needed. So there was discussion exercised there to lessen the restrictions, I guess.
It's worthwhile to, like the Conway Wells building, for instance, that's also an industrial site that they chose to be all masonry materials.
Sure.
Full on, so
Correct.
that really doesn't bring any guidance for us. If you're going to provide optional architectural treatment of the sort they're asking for, I think it's worth kind of memorializing into the minutes through your discussion why you're doing that, because it's offset on these, two elevations this far from neighboring development. And that, by doing that, what you do is you distinguish this from any others that come forward in the future. You make this
You explain
a
why.
unique
it's-
circumstance,
yeah.
and they all
That
have unique
frontage.
circumstances.
I think that's one of the big points here, is it's not frontage to a public road, because it is tucked into the
He
middle.
coined that there was the same thing, their addition building,
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right.
Is it as tucked back?
it was
They're
behind
also
their,
industrial.
it was behind the initial building.
Right.
Yeah, but they didn't have to do
Right.
masonry upgrade.
In the past, the industrial buildings that were built on industrial drive just had to have the face 3 foot high.
Yeah.
Just the face,
front
3
facing.
foot high.
Mhm.
Anything in the back, didn't have to worry about. Any of the buildings facing bucket did not have to have any masonry facing.
So, that answers your question?
No, it does, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm a big precedent guy.
That was
You
a
know,
good
when
question.
if you just, it's not a variance, but it's a consideration. But I just always wanna make sure that you're considering what you've done before and what you're gonna do in the future, and how you're consistent.
So, it was suggested that the roadway was going to be used for the fire department access from 164 to Easement Road. I believe right now it's just going to be for gravel.
It is currently.
Yeah, so suggestion was made, maybe considering a grid system that dirt can get filled into it and grass planted to try to give more of a green space if that road's only going to be accessed in case of an emergency. That grid system would allow, like landscape-wise, for grass to grow through there, but at the same time, it would give enough rigidity for fire trucks to use that if they needed to.
I don't think so, I think
No.
I'd rather see gravel there.
Gravel road, that gravel road has been, a lot of heavy equipment has been on it.
It was
Very
just,
firm road.
We did ask the
There
applicant
was
during
discussion.
discussions that as a part of completing that, that they reclaim as much green space as they can.
We narrow it down to 24 feet.
Yeah.
You're right, and that's our intention.
And
But
they
for maintenance
like
in the
that
winter and
idea
stuff,
because
you
they
don't wanna
own
mow,
that
you don't
house
wanna
next
plow
door.
grass.
All right, yeah, it was just a suggestion that came in, so
Yep.
just wanted reasonable to talk about it.
Jamin, one of the other things that came up, and it was kind of spurred from the naming of the project,
Mhm.
we've already talked about earlier.
Yep.
Whether or not they were right or wrong, whether or not somebody would have a perception that it was connected to the Lake Park property, right, the subdivision, and therefore feel like they may have rights to said property. So the ask is whether or not in the subdivision or the condo association documentation, some level of verbiage indicating that it is not associated with the Lake Park subdivision and therefore have no rights to said waterway, just something simple.
We would be happy to put that in.
I had hoped as much, but I wanted to express that concern.
Disclaimer.
Yeah, we'll put a disclaimer in there, as that it has no affiliation with the Lake Park subdivision.
Yeah, and, it was one of those things, like even with that berm there, there's always that question, is somebody gonna just walk across the berm and, go take a dunk in the water or what have you? And, even if we decided to, put a sign or two up on the berm, saying private property, no trespassing, that's facing inwards towards your condos to help solidify that people don't think they can just cross over the berm and use the property.
We would be happy to accommodate signs and a disclaimer in the condo docs.
Okay. Mary, did you have anything else when you were doing your site plan review and stuff that we had to touch on? You're looking for feedback on the plan commission? I'll just skim it. I made notes on some of them, I just want to make sure I follow them.
Architecture, landscaping.
Oh, the lighting.
Lighting is all according to code.
Yeah, again, from a commentary standpoint, just to help put it out there, because not everybody has seen it. The lighting plan that's being proposed, again, meets the code that we have in place, but also to show that there's, what was the wattage by the lot line? There's a candle.
The maximum,
Yeah.
maximum we allow is 0.5 on the
Yeah,
ground at the
yeah,
lot lines.
yeah.
And these are all well under, mostly it's 0. There's a couple of spots where it's 0.2, 0.3 on the ground at the lot line.
And again, helping getting that out there so that the citizens next door, at Lake Park, know that the lighting is specific, it's directional, it's not even supposed to be crossing that lot line barrier, so that'll help as far as some of those concerns.
And directed specifically to the inside of all the buildings, not outside.
Correct.
There's no planned lighting on the roadway, correct?
Nope.
I wouldn't imagine.
Don't you make a motion as well? Lynn? Okay. Yes.
Pretty small print, it's hard to see. The green boxes show where the light fixtures themselves will be placed.
And they're on motion, I believe.
Yeah, so those will also be on motion so that they're timed to go down to a smaller percentage of, 100%. And then when somebody drives in, then those will bring up to 100%, which 100% meets the code of that. Otherwise, they're gonna dim down,
Okay.
if there's no motion in there.
So that's even better. Because
Yes.
again, when there's no motion, that lighting value is gonna be even significantly
Correct.
lower.
It's more of us just having something that was a safety, security issue.
So that there would always be some light.
Always, yes.
Yeah, whatever that, percentage is, if it's 50% you want us no motion or whatever it may be.
Correct.
Till the raccoons are making it flicker.
Yeah, and all of a sudden,
Yeah.
there's some wildlife running through there, you see them tripping in the vehicles, right?
Right.
So.
What's up?
Goal is this, so just leave out right now, like 10 weeks, obviously that's kind of out of my.
Work with that. We've already had our discussion.
For that emergency exit, with that being gravel, is there concern about plowing that in the winter time and where the gravel ends up
Yes.
when being plowed?
It has to be plowed.
And we'll have recycled asphalt on top. Which Eric didn't seem to think would be an issue during.
Yeah.
And again, that's part of the condo association, they have to maintain that as well as the main road, obviously the private road.
Is there a place to put the
Yes.
snow when you plow that?
Well, if he's given up he's reclaiming some of the green space on the sides, right now it's a 30-foot easement, and it's gonna drop down to, let's say, 24 emergency roads, so you have that 6 feet of recaptured space that they can use for plowing.
Correct.
Another question about the addition of the parking spots, is that something that you're concerned about welcoming people to store things outside or park for 24 hours?
Yeah.
I know it's not allowed, but
Yeah.
is it almost welcoming more than not having them there?
Well, I think you're right, but at the same token, you guys were recommending that we needed additional parking or to show parking for people that are there, so,
Double-edged sword.
yeah.
If you get a guy that's here on a Thursday and he wants to work on his Corvette for a few hours, you don't want him blocking the roadway.
Right.
Give it a little bit of guidance.
And again, I truly think that the association is gonna police this. Again, it's not, you spend this kind of money on something, you're not gonna let people just walk around and do what they want.
And if you don't put striping, that takes away the impression that it's a parking spot.
Right.
If you have the parking spots over by the restroom and the handicap parking over there, that, again, in previous experience, if you don't put the lines for a designated parking spot, people don't think it's a place to park. If you put lines, now all of a sudden, you're right, you create additional places where things can accumulate. And there is policing I own something and I see a guy who's got 4 tires off, it's 5 o'clock, I'm not gonna be real happy. And I'm gonna report that to the head of the association, who's in turn gonna get back to that owner and,
A violation of the development agreement would be a code violation also, allowing for
Right.
the issuance of citation.
right.
Mary, what additional feedback are you looking for?
Well,
Did you find anyone?
specifically with respect to the architecture, I want to know what to tell them to put in their final drawings, so that when we come back to you, what we have is truly a final draft. And then just with respect to landscaping, whether you have any specific recommendations for changes that you wanted to see incorporated, so we can make that, they can make that plan as final as possible before they come back. One last time, potentially one last time.
I would like to offer a little bit of deferment on landscaping. I'd like to be able to talk internally with the homeowners association of the development to the east of that property about easements that are in place. and if we could get back to you in a few days. for the
That's
landscaping
fine.
portion.
That's fine, but again, just be cautious that we can't require them to go out and secure easements on property they don't own.
There's an existing easement.
But it doesn't pertain to this development project.
Does not.
Do you know that the berm was put there in anticipation of this development project?
It's still technically on our property. That's what I'm saying, that's where this is not, it's not for the planning commission or the board to be involved in that part of this discussion.
Yeah, something
That's
happened
why-
privately.
That's why they had to move the landscaping material, meaning trees, over to the properties, because that was discussed in depth and decided, like, no, listen, your landscaping plan has to be contained within your site. The fact that you've done this berm on the other site, which we gave them approval to do, you know, the HOA separately, outside of this village, board or planning commission, we have to handle that as a private matter and hold Jamin and them accountable to that agreement that we have with him, separately from this construction plan related to this site plan operation. That's the way this went.
Yeah, so they own that lot one next to the 30-foot, next to the west side of a couple of the buildings, next to the west side, if you look up on the screen. They own this lot one, for instance. And they could propose to put some landscaping right in here on their lot one, if they wanted to, if that would be landscaping to solve the need for screening. They could put it on there, provided they give us an easement, give an easement to the condo association, giving permanent rights of access. So that's an option for them. They didn't,
That's what we'd have to do.
they didn't pursue that option because they're putting their landscaping internal.
Yeah, so for us.
I don't think they feel like they have a clear path towards securing an easement on off-site real estate to the east.
No,
And
that's
so-
what I'm saying, there's a current easement.
Not for this. And that's where you're getting confused, Tony. That's not related to this. That easement related to the dedication of a potential future road or egress to Lake Park from Edgewood to it is for the property that is the landfill.
So
That's
that
what the easement
easement
is.
is
But that's
intact,
but that's
you know.
the easement that runs on north
Correct,
from there.
correct. Two different parcels there. We're talking about the development, which is the storage condos, that does not have the easement.
Right, the easement runs across the landfill, I get that, and then it also runs across
Straight
the
north.
HOA property,
Straight north.
straight north.
Yep.
And that would also be used as potential easement going back into either property back there, correct? I don't know what that easement was originally there for.
An extra roadway or an extra entrance into Lake Park,
Okay.
Or an entrance into the landfill property from,
Lake Park.
Or from.
instead of Edgewood. So that's what it was for. It's not part of the property in question that we're talking about, the storage condos.
Okay.
And that's why we can't use that as leverage or a discussion point, because it's not technically related, and that's why we had to remove the
So then this
landscaping.
is back to a private affair basically
Correct.
between the two entities.
Yeah, so that easement stays intact, and the attorneys have been addressing the question of, well, this new road cuts across that easement that's there and will stay there presumably.
Yep.
And the conclusion I don't think is final at this time, but I understand the leaning in the understanding is
Yeah.
that crossing with the new road across the existing easement is going to be okay.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, I mean, you know, I would 100% assume nobody in Lake Park would like to see a road created out of that corner to access that landfill property, to leverage that easement, because that's what the easement's for. There's no way you could pull all 42 houses, and I feel pretty confident in saying nobody ever would want to see that thing develop to be an entrance/exit for any one of those properties. So, for that reason, the easement has no bearing related to the storage condos. Again, knowing that the easement is for the landfill site. So that's where it was going back and forth with the lawyers, and, you know, if to properly record the CSM, we have to release that easement to say, hey, there's never gonna be a road here. Do it, just be done with it, because there's no way Lake Park would ever support that. And again, you're part of that. I can't imagine you would ever agree that we would need a road or entrance exit out to that point. We have a couple people in the audience, I'm assuming would have the same opinion of that.
Right. You are absolutely correct about that.
So,
That easement as it sits right now we have no understanding at all that that conveys any privileges to the developer to plant on it in support of the condominium project.
That's what I.
That's what we're doing.
Can you show where that easement actually is? Just so we know.
It's literally right where the berm is.
The more recent constructed berm, right next to the patch where the kids.
Like the newest one in the neighborhood, so.
Yeah, fair enough.
I'm gonna see if I can find the old drawing.
David, north, south, or east, west? Which, east, west, or north, south?
It runs north-south. So
Okay,
my
gotcha.
entrance, the proposed entrance in top of Edgewood, if you
Straight.
took that straight through right into Lake Park.
Got it. You don't need to pull up. I got it. Yep.
I know I have one at home, I just don't know if I brought it with me tonight.
We've been bouncing around on topics. I think maybe we should start taking them off one at a time.
Yeah,
Mary seemed to be interested in the,
this one.
Yes. Can we ask questions before you guys then we can leave, or, I don't want to comment, I just want a question.
like, public comments are closed, right?
Until the end, when we haven't given.
I don't want to comment, I just wanted a question. Two of us have questions.
We can take a question, can we? They have to be directed towards the planning commission.
Yep, that's it. Why not Tim that one?
I actually just have two pretty simple questions. The first one would be with the sidewalk on Edgewood.
Dave, please, name and address.
Oh, sorry.
Clerk.
Sorry, Tim Watts, West 225, South 8635, Lake Park Drive.
Thank you, sir.
Just with regards to the sidewalk on Edgewood and the proposed stop sign, I do know that that is a common spot for police officers to sit because it's sheltered. Are there any vision triangle clearings that's going to be done for the traffic coming out to be able to see oncoming traffic on Edgewood?
I am sure it'll be constructed to whatever the village ordinances say.
Okay, even though it's a private road?
The private street is
Yeah.
going to be built to public road
Okay,
spec.
all right, okay, and then my next question would be, the fence coming with the driveway coming onto the,
164?
no, onto the dump site. Is there any thought of, because that is a higher property, headlights coming out in 24 hours a day, shining onto property owners now that some trees have been cleared out? Is there a way to bend that a little bit more so that's not as much of a tangent out of there to be able to alleviate headlight going right across into properties on the lake?
So that's gonna come up
Straight
More than the
here.
road does.
just a little, it's instead of the swiping so far left, it's gonna be more straight than angled, right?
I think from the inside out.
Yeah,
She's trying to draw it from this way, that's
Gotcha.
what, but yeah, so you're saying when they go to exit, when they're clearing that and starting to bend, those
yeah,
lights are
because
shining
it's up
straight east.
higher, the
They're
fences are
shining
gonna
straight
be next, so if you turn them a little bit sooner, it might prevent headlights.
You know, that's a valid point. You might see some of that light as people are pulling out, heading east before they turn south.
Well, and again, I think the assumption with that is that there's gonna be traffic constantly in and out of here at night. And, I mean, if 2 or 3 cars in a night exit out of there in the dark, I would be surprised.
I don't disagree with that, it was just a question.
Even landscaping to mitigate it or something too. I don't know.
It would be off-site, they'd have to
We
get
could
an
too.
easement.
Yeah, we could on our outlast, we could plant some trees.
It was just a question.
Those
It's
are
not
also
saying-
things that I am more than happy to discuss with Lake Park,
Yeah.
doing some additional plantings on the
Other
dump site.
property.
But for me to put it in the plan, everything that I
Has to
do
be changed.
outside has to be easements So again, that would certainly be a discussion that I'd be happy to have with everybody in Lake Park to kind of appease them.
And my last question, I kind of brought it up in the public comments before, but with the landfill currently there, I don't know what can be done with it, but I mean, what are the limits that the village is gonna put on? Because right now, there's storage of material on there. I don't know if the owner has plans to store trucks, equipment, more landscaping material, but that's all, basically, if that happens, that'll be a blighted property directly for the Lake Park residents.
Yeah.
We can see directly that with no landscaping covering that whatsoever currently, so I don't know what the limits are gonna be, especially if there's construction. And they have all their equipment over there by the Quonset now they move it to, I don't know what the limits are on that, so I'd like to know what that is.
Well, we can't address the other property, it's not part of this development. Jamin just said he'd be more than happy to sit down with the residents of Lake Park and the homeowners association and discuss screening and whatever else.
I agree.
We have to attack these as two separate entities.
Sure.
We, you know, that property is not
But
on
doesn't
the
the,
agenda.
before they use the landfill site, don't they have to get permission on to what kind of use it's gonna
It's
be?
their property, putting a vehicle or whatever, the village has no say on that. I mean, if it's a bunch of
Storage and-
rundown demolition or
Storage
demolished,
of materials though?
No, they do have a limit.
for the storage, yes.
Yeah, but for
So-
parking active use construction equipment, that's
Yeah.
fair game.
Really, that site has no use approval,
No site of operation.
no plan of operations, no building site, any of those things. So it should really be in a locked condition called per existing conditions. And so it should not be ebbing and flowing from time to time. Suddenly there's a whole lot of stuff being stored there, suddenly there's not. Suddenly there's things parked there, suddenly there's not. It shouldn't be operating like that, at least not to the extent that whatever parking happens there is an exception to what the past history of parking. So I guess what I'm saying to you is that
It shouldn't
if
change.
things start to change and evolve there, they shouldn't be, and let the village know.
Okay.
That's a complaint to file with the village.
Sure.
So basically, nothing should change, or if it does, then it's a valid complaint and they'll be held to being
Right.
back to before.
Appreciate the
And
answer.
what could happen in the future is none of us can really look with a crystal
I just,
ball.
again, just asking everybody to be good neighbors, that's it.
And that's kind of where I agree. And I wasn't here for the beginning of the neighborhood conceptualized, handshake agreements at the HOA and stuff like that. But it seems to be that one end of the bargain wasn't necessarily held up, and that's where some of the hard feelings came from. So that's why we're trying to hash it out here. So it's kind of in a plan, so we can hold something to it. Like, hey, this is where landscaping is going to go. This is going to stop headlights because of this. Again, I wasn't there. I don't know the exact verbiage. However, it seems to be that that's the way it was before. So that's why we try to hash out here. It's not that we don't want the stuff to get developed, because honestly, some of us are probably going to rent out some of those units too, right? It's a great plan. When it comes to like the masonry and stuff like that, yeah, you don't see it from the road, but you see it from the 44 houses in the neighborhood the whole time, which I would argue is more important than seeing it from a road, because you're just driving by it, right? So those types of things are really important. The foliage. We right now we have a 10-foot berm around the whole side, right? So we don't see the stuff coming outside. We're talking about getting rid of that. My kids are 4 years old. Those spruce trees, they'll be graduated from college by the time those cover up the buildings, right? So we have those 10-foot barriers right now to block the industrial park, things like that. So those types of things in consideration. Yeah, sure, you don't see it from the road, but you see it from, I actually don't even see it from my house particularly, but the neighborhood sees it from the neighborhood, right? And the majority of the houses do see it all the time. So that's why we're trying to hash these considerations out here on those final plans, so we can kind of hold a candle to that and say this is what we kind of, as good neighbors, as aesthetics with the neighborhood, the village, we hold those standards, not to a road, but to a neighborhood, if that makes sense.
Well, again, you and I talked on the phone
Sure.
about this. I mean, I'm one of the individuals
Absolutely.
that will be
Yeah.
directly looking at this. I
Sure.
purposely bought my lot on the side that I did to look out the back and see sunset across the water.
Sure.
Guess what? That sunset is going to potentially include some storage condos.
Absolutely.
And there will be some screening of whatever we can
Yeah.
get as much as we can through our conversation
Sure.
directly with the HOA and Jamin and them.
Sure.
But I've come to the conclusion that, that's part of what happens when there's open land and stuff
Yeah.
gets developed. The key is working together, trying to make sure that we can mitigate it as much as possible.
Sure, and that's why, you know, we try to use the village and the codes and the pre-existing things that are in place to make sure that those things happen, and not just, hey, this is what would work best on the side. But we make sure that, I don't know what the building code is exactly, but I'm sure there is some sort of landscaping plan, like you said, per 1,000 square feet, things like that. And instead of just planting it, let's say in the middle of the property, which they can't in this circumstance, but to ensure those 2 trees per every 1,000 feet are located in spots that actually make sense for us. And things that don't mature in 20 years from now when. I just sold a house on, you guys probably seen it, down Janesville, Westwood. They just clear cut 5 acres. My house was built right there. And I tried to sell it, and I bet you about 20 people came by, and their main concern was how long is construction going to take? And it took way longer for us to sell, right? So things like this construction, things like the landscaping, I'm really familiar with that because I just sold a house in that scenario. That's why I'm looking, you know, to get these things written down and hashed out on paper and actually per the village instead of on the side handshakes.
But unfortunately, as we clarified, unfortunately, the planning commission in the village has no power in that scenario.
But they do have power to make landscaping plans that would be aesthetically pleasing to the neighborhood, correct?
And it
The
is.
village does have power.
Yeah.
So to the extent that this road is required to provide the access to the development, the road becomes a part of the project.
Yeah.
To the extent that we need to screen the road.
From the road perspective.
Yeah.
Then it would be on the applicant's shoulders to provide whatever that screening is determined to
Fair enough.
have to be.
Yeah. That's kind of what I'm getting at.
Yes, and so that is in the village's purview.
Okay.
That part. I was alluding to the berm, you know, which, again, the handshake
Yeah.
agreement we was calling out, that was related to the berm north and south, you know, in the outlet. That's what I was saying. We don't technically, because we're talking about this development, that is off-site, as we've already
Sure.
talked about, we have to grant him an easement and basically give him that ability for this parcel, the storage project, to be able to then maintain that berm.
Sure. Or they can make another berm, correct? I mean, it doesn't have to be just our berm. We can require them to make another berm or a raised area that will cover that. It doesn't have to be our berm necessarily. It can be built into the plan to do the berm on their side.
I'm not required to build a berm on my property.
No, I understand. That's why I'm saying the village, we would come together and get some sort of aesthetically pleasing thing. Because again, it's not that we don't want these built, or me personally, I guess I can't speak for everybody, because they're nice, but I just want to make sure that they're covered. You
Understood.
know, aesthetically.
So I think
Right.
the commission can take it
Sure.
Yes.
there,
Absolutely.
understanding your issue.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you for that.
Okay.
And thank you for taking the comments instead of at the end while we're talking about it.
Have a good night. Thanks. So, let's address Mary's laundry list of open items.
Feedback.
Right.
We kind of did, but is there any more?
How do you want to go on the architecture? Are you ready to discuss it as a whole group and each of you provide some input, or how do you want us to provide that feedback to the applicant?
What in particular on architecture are we wanting to discuss, like the actual buildings themselves?
50%
The masonry
Okay.
discretion piece that we already kind of talked about, what we formally saying as a commission. Are we willing to use that flexibility to say because of X, meaning the fact that it's off of 2 roads, not really on the open, you know, it's using a private road entrance, it's setback, do we request or require to have more masonries than what he's presenting?
How much of those buildings actually is visible from the road level at Lake Park?
There's quite a bit, it depends on where you are in Lake Park.
With the berm, you're gonna see the top.
That's what I'm
If
saying.
you're in that curve.
If you go 50% up with brick, are you even gonna
You're
see
not gonna
that unless
see-
you walk
you're not
over
gonna
the
see it
berm?
on
You're only
building
gonna see it
10 or
from
11.
this side of Lake Park.
Your side.
From the elevation side, because you're distant. But if you're on the road, because of where that berm is, those buildings that are closest, that lower section of that
Right.
building, you're not
I
gonna
can
see.
tell you as a homeowner looking directly at it, I don't really care about the masonry as much as I care about his landscaping plan.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, from your side,
Yeah.
you're not gonna know
I
if it's
see it,
brick
I'm in an
or
elevated
paint.
position and all that jazz, so, but
Well,
again, that's different.
But from 700 feet,
Yeah.
can you tell the difference between metal
No.
and
Right, that's what I'm getting
masonry?
at, there's no
Agreed.
difference.
I mean, the closest road is Edgewood, and that's like 235 feet to the back of the building.
Right, and I'm looking at your landscape plan, you got a lot of those, compact dogwoods or whatever.
And a lot of pines, I mean, there's a lot of planting that are.
I see potential for a lot of adhesion to a masonry surface,
Yeah, it is.
whereas a painted surface is gonna be much easier to maintain and keep clean looking, my opinion.
Correct.
So
Let them spend money on trees and not masonry.
So the two buildings that are, and I'm sorry, I don't know what the numbers are. This is such small.
Didn't you have the bigger one?
It's on the landscape plan.
Go on the bigger one.
Look at the big landscape.
You should have a bigger landscaping plan.
Oh,
Three.
yeah.
It'd be a lot easier to read.
Yeah, let me get back to it. Okay, so building 5 and 4, would that have masonry all the way around it then, because it's exposed to all 4 sides, or would it still just be the
It's
front?
exposed to all 4 sides of a parking lot. It's the inner building. Nobody sees it from the outside.
That would be the same with building 8 and 9, so it would just be, would there be any masonry on those then?
No, that's what he's proposing, is no
Right.
masonry,
Okay,
that's what we're talking about.
I'm not, sorry, I was not following that too well. So there wouldn't be any masonry on any of the buildings?
Building 1 has.
Building 1 has masonry on the whole front, and then the
Which, yeah.
front facade, and then the front of the building, correct.
So that would be the only building that has any.
And we would probably put some on some of the ends of the buildings, again, just to make it look nice.
Yeah.
But I think that's at the discretion once the buildings start being, it's all inner, so it's, again, it's not gonna affect the outside aesthetics.
Okay, so, thank you, I understand. I was confused.
Does anybody else have any major concerns or complaints about what he's presenting related to the masonry piece, or is that?
No, I think what he's got for landscaping on this is gonna cover up anything he would put on in short order.
Do we still have those two, yeah, that's it right over
Right here
there,
behind the
with
chairs.
color
Mhm.
schemes? If anybody needs to see what the building colors are gonna look like. It actually is gonna blend in, I think, fairly well.
Looks like those maples grow pretty fast at about 3 foot a year. The spruce a little slower. Those maples will fill out pretty quick though.
Infiltrating, breaking the concrete in no time.
Any other concerns on the architectural side?
So the recourse for any kind of like landscaping would be filing a complaint through the village then, if someone was saying it was unsightly?
Well, that's really not something we would expect to have any recourse on. We need to understand what this site plan does, what those buildings back up to, what their exposure is toward, require the proper landscaping be installed, and that's that. We can't come back in after the fact and say, you know what, we'd like 10 more trees.
No, I'm just saying maintaining it wise.
Well, yeah,
With it
that's
being a
required.
living thing and stuff like that.
Yeah, they're not
For the life of the
If it's not
building.
maintained, if someone has a complaint, they would have to obviously go through the village then, you know, in future, just that it's not visually appealing or it becomes
Dilapidated, or not
dilapidated or,
maintained.
yeah.
Trees have been dead
Typically,
for
we'll even
5
go
years.
back if it's.
Mainly the fire department would watch that pretty closely also, because there are some buildings in the industrial park where trees are too close to it. And one building has a tree laying on it right now, and I have to go under, for safety reasons, in the fire department to make sure that it's all cleaned up. So it'd be my responsibility to keep him in line.
So then do they revert back to this plan, original plan, and say, okay, this is what's expected and it should be that?
This is a requirement for the life of the development that these plants be installed and maintained. There have been times when stuff will outgrow its purpose and its function. They can start over again with the original planting height at that time.
So I guess that brings up the question, is there any aesthetics in the landscaping, like grass or anything else being put on, or on the sides of the roadway? Or at the stormwater discharge point?
It's not shown on the landscape then. Do you have an idea, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, we can plant it up with all native grasses, like per wetland. I mean, we can throw that on the plan, I'd be happy
I
to.
think that's actually a really good point. Even the areas where the landscaping is going to happen in the 20 feet behind the buildings and so on, what is that grade, that surface going to be?
It's all grass.
Lawn.
Yeah,
It
it's
says
everything.
lawn, I don't know.
Yeah, it says
I
lawn.
assumed that.
Yes.
But we
Says
should
lawn,
probably
but-
have it denoted, yeah.
It does not
It's a-
say on the outside of the road.
Yeah, it says that in between the buildings, the little pockets, but it
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily say that across the outside borders.
Gotcha.
Or in the location.
I can have that
But it's good
labeled out.
clarification.
Mhm.
I mean, there's a line depicted, even if you look over it by the utilities, that's where you can kind of get an idea that it does say lawn over there, but maybe not right behind the building on the south. You see that right north of where it shows where the septic's gonna be? And that's that line drawn, so that kind of, it's kind of on there, just not in often enough spaces where it stands out.
It meets all the stormwater management specs.
Yeah, but this could be a,
Right.
a green,
Right,
What else
it's
is
up to them. But I mean, they're gonna have to prove it.
right.
Architecture and landscaping.
those two? Well, the architecture, I think we've covered.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like there's more feedback on that.
Okay, and the reason for that is because of its remote location off the
Yeah,
direct street
right.
fronts?
And the
And the quality.
extensive landscaping
Right.
that
And the
is
landscape.
being deployed.
Got it.
I think the one question that was still out there though was with the landscaping, are we gonna require him to screen in what I guess would be the northeast corner during construction?
What do you mean screening?
Plant the landscaping, all that.
Yeah,
good
you had asked if we
Oh,
could
phasing.
waive that until you start building those buildings.
Well,
There's some talk about phasing in your landscape.
well, and again, that comes back to the developer agreement, but in the original draft, it has all of this site grading should be done and all of the landscape should be done. That would make no sense. It's a 20-foot from the lot line to the building. If we plant plants along there, it's physically impossible for us to construct the building.
Right,
So,
100% understand why you're asking, I'm just trying to get the planning commission to understand that that is an ask on the table, that
Yeah.
right,
we
so
waive that requirement.
Yeah, I think we can work that out.
In the developer
As part of
agreement?
the detailing of that development agreement.
Yeah.
And come back with a rational proposal
I
for the
would-
commission.
and I would propose as a building goes up, the landscape on the outside of that is finished.
Sure, the
Building
spots you're
goes
not
up.
gonna touch anymore.
Lawn goes in, those plantings behind that unit goes, and again, we anticipate this going extremely quickly.
Yeah, we want some safety nets in
Sure.
here so that if phase 2 doesn't get off the ground as soon as we thought, we don't want that whole north section to just sit there.
A contingency with the date.
Yes,
Yes.
kind of a worst case deal.
Yep.
But I think we're okay on that. So I think I have what I need.
Okay, do we have anything else to address from Naomi?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there were some environmental comments, trustee Honeyshaw brought up, I don't know what, where to take those. I mean, there was a comment of a phase 1 assessment. I guess I could use a little more direction.
I don't know that the village can require a phase 1 environmental assessment be done on a project area.
Well, I think we can.
Okay.
I think there's a potential for harm off-site. I think we can require, I think it's usually related to the project. But in all, phase 1, I always understood that they were just records, checks, and on-site inspections. It really didn't involve any testing. Then that's phase 2, I think, when you start to get into the testing, some of which is done already. But I'm not the expert on, I guess I'll defer to the experts in the board to tell us what to do. I don't know enough. It's an engineering issue.
Do you know why that wasn't recommended as part of the original project scope?
Why the groundwater testing and.
Why the phase 1 assessment?
Yeah, I did talk to Travis this morning about the difference between a phase 1 and a phase 2. And, very briefly, maybe like 3 to 4 minutes. And that was my understanding too, is that a phase 1 is pretty much doing the background check, looking at all documents, coming up with a plan for testing. And he reviewed a lot of, you know, the documents that he could find online, some of the documents provided by Vernon Township.
Yeah, that list that you rattled off.
Yeah,
that is
made
part of
some
the report.
recommendations why he didn't recommend the groundwater test. We didn't discuss that, in detail.
So,
I guess I'm sorry.
Yeah, I might be able to shed a little bit more on that. So the phase one is exactly that. It's looking at historical and current conditions and then making recommendations off of that. So it usually leads into a phase two, or it might be a modified phase two, where you're looking at any type of sampling or anything else that needs to occur for both soil and water conditions. But it also goes back to other structural events that are on there. So for instance, if the Kwanzaa hut has to be raised, it would be looking at the Kwanzaa hut to see if there's any asbestos or other contamination associated with it. Probably not, but that would be something inside of phase one.
Phase one recommendation to be done during this.
Right, at least they would go in and they would look at the structure and say, we think that there may be an issue with asbestos, and then it would lead into the phase two, if you will, the recommendation to go through and do the testing. But the recommendation would come off the phase one.
Okay.
So it also would look at the other current structure that's on the site, and that would be the well that would be abandoned, and looking at water conditions for, you know, making recommendations based upon data that's been done off of that to make recommendations for further testing. The limited phase one assessment recommendations that were done back about 20 years ago, whenever it was still considered the leasing property, I believe, led to further testing that needed to be done in the soils of the properties, including water testing, more thorough water testing, and because it's been a period of almost 20 years, things have obviously changed tremendously. So I would expect that a phase one full assessment would come back with those types of recommendations. That prior to starting anything else, that they would look at that. They also look at future impacts, and that's where you're looking at, you know, it's like the you know, father time. You're looking at the past, the present, and the future. And with the future, you're wanting to look at impacts. And again, that's what I talked about with looking at assessments and looking at risk, especially on what may occur from the adjoining property, and if there's any migration of contaminants that may be there now, but more importantly, 5 years, 10 years down the road, if nothing is done. And then they would make the recommendation of risk based upon that to say, should this continue without anything being done to structurally protect this property from that property?
Does a phase one assessment get reviewed by the state
No, but
or
it's,
overseeing agency?
if they're involved, yes. But, you know, the DNR's been somewhat hands-off with this, so I don't know if, they wouldn't give any type of blessing or recommendation back on it necessarily, but they would take it and maybe further advise on it. DNR's more into an advisement capacity at this point. Whenever the responsible party letters come out, then they're more into an enforcement phase. So if something would raise a red flag with them, they would then go into enforcement, but right now they're just basically there as advisement.
I think what you're trying to advise is that we dig and we dig and we dig until we find something, is basically what you're getting at. Everybody seems to be okay with this thing at this point. Kapoor was fine with it. She issued a recommendation for approval with conditions. My environmental engineer sees no issue with it. Our regular engineers have no issue with it. The DNR doesn't have an issue with it. The only person that has an issue with it is you. And I feel like nothing that we do is going to be good enough for you until you find something. So if we do phase one and phase two, then you're going to require phase three. Then you need to move over into this corner, and it's going to be a never-ending battle with you. That's the issue that we're running into. What's going to be good enough for you? For what will be good enough for you to say okay for this project? That's what I'm asking. That's what I would like to hear from you.
To follow the recommendations that I've given tonight.
Your recommendations above and beyond the DNR's, Kapoor's environmental engineer, my environmental engineer, and the DNR.
I sit on the planning commission for the village of Big Bend. I'm making recommendations back so that we can digest this and then promulgate the pathway moving forward.
I understand that, but
I'm
what
not
I'm
here in
getting
the
at,
capacity of an engineer, I'm not here in the capacity of anything else except for someone that is on the planning commission making recommendations back for things that we need to do to protect ourselves from future liability.
I feel like, I understand your concerns, but I feel like they are here and they will never be met. It's literally impossible, I think, to meet your expectations of what you want.
I don't feel that way.
I think the due diligence has been done by everybody. I've done everything that everybody has asked and gotten okays from everybody that has been asked, yet it's not good enough for you. You want more. You know, all you talk about is how high in regard the DNR is. The DNR is the most powerful entity in the state, and they okayed it, and they have no issue with it, yet you say it's not good enough. Where does it end? That's what I'm wondering.
All right, well, I've stated my piece, so
Okay.
thanks for the feedback.
I've got two hypotheticals that could come into play. You get your soil testing reports back from PSI Friday or Monday or whenever he gets them back to you. What if they come back looking awful?
Again, it's
I'm
right.
hoping they don't.
Right, but it's conditions with approval, or I mean approval with conditions. So, you know, I'm here tonight to get approval for this project based on conditions. That was Naomi's recommendation, that was Mary's recommendation, that was the attorney's recommendation. Approval with conditions, that's what I'm here tonight
Yes,
to
sir.
look for. If they come back with terrible results, which, again, when Pat Patterson did the results, he seen nothing in the test pits that shows anything but virgin soil, no discoloration of layering or anything like that. If they came back, then yes, absolutely. If they come back with terrible samples, bubbling hazardous waste coming out of the holes, we would do whatever you recommend. But if they come back clean, I think, again, that is enough due diligence to say that we can proceed with this project. The dump site is a completely separate entity, and I want to move forward with that. We want to move forward with the testing, move out, define the space, and get that done with. That's something that I've already trying to work with the village on to proceed forward with that. But that does not involve this development.
Do we want to consider additional test sites for the location of the pipe discharge, as trustee Hoddishell pointed out, on the landfill site? Similar to what we are proposing in the basin, similar requirements.
But what-
And on the road.
What are you gonna, it's a dump. You dig, I can tell you right now, you dig down 3 feet, you're gonna find garbage.
What, okay, well, what are you,
Right, I don't
well,
know.
I mean,
But that
that's
comes back to
different
that comes back to the engineering of the stormwater management plan.
And it was okay.
And that's what I'm getting at.
Right.
Why was this not a concern that was raised as part of the approval from the various parties? It's a valid concern.
Right.
But why was that not part of this discussion before the stormwater management plan was reviewed and now already blessed?
By 2 separate engineering firms.
That's the part I'm struggling with. Like, it's a valid concern, I get it,
Yeah.
but why wasn't that part of the equation / evaluation by the professionals before we even got to this point?
I mean, the retention pond meets 100-year, right? 5, 10,
Yeah.
100-year. How much water is gonna discharge through this discharge pipe?
I can.
It's all specified out, it's all there.
It's all right there. I mean,
Right, but again, we're moving water in the same direction that water's always moved. Again, 2 engineering firms have verified this and have okayed it.
Independent.
Independent, yes.
I'm talking more about the putting in the structure, coming off the pond. It does cross the line. We did do testing we did require testing on the site. I mean,
Right.
there's a point there. I mean, I could add that to my conditions. There is some excavation there. The road, it would be excavated only,
But you weren't
You know,
requiring it
less
for the
than
road. you weren't requiring them to
No,
sample for where
because,
they're
no,
excavating
that's
the
right,
road.
we weren't, because the road was approved by the DNR,
Yeah.
and the road was only, it's 12 plus 15 inches. This one would probably be a little bit deeper than the road.
Not
And
mu-
or we could get requirement, I mean, that was also in the plan that went to the DNR.
Right.
And Travis looked at it.
And
Right.
again, that's my point, is
Right.
again, you know,
I mean, I'm just
if
bringing
we're
it
gonna
up.
do
Do
it in
we
one
want
spot,
to
we either gotta
ask-
be consistent.
Do we want to, do we want to include that in our, after our discussion today as a condition? It was not you're right, it was not identified previously.
I will say that the discharge point had a test pit that was done quite a few years ago, but it was done pretty close to where that outflow area is going to be, and the soils at someplace between 1 and 3 feet below ground level was found to be high in chrysene and arsenic. There's no other further testing done in that area. And I don't know what those levels were, but they exceeded both state and federal levels on both of them.
Those tests that we recommend, that Travis recommended would pick up on those contaminants?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. No, yes, it would, on both of them. Yeah. But that would be for the discharge area in the landfill where the pipe would come out.
Right.
Yeah.
So that is
It was
the
just-
outlet structure.
Yeah, I was looking at the elevations.
Yeah, remember we were talking about how it's gonna flow
Right.
from here.
That comes out at 828 where it's going.
Well, I mean, I would, based on that, you know, without Travis being here, I mean, that makes sense to me to add that as a recommendation for approval. Testing at that location.
You know, you cut a couple hundred feet of pipe, what's it gonna cost? Could the discharge be moved to a safer
You could pull it
location?
back, you could pull it back,
Keep it on property.
keep it on the property, or that, yeah.
We're talking about events that might happen once every 100 years, right?
No, that pipe will discharge when water gets in the pond, it'll discharge through there. It's not the overflow spillway.
Yeah, the overflow spillway will probably never see water go across it.
But
Now the discharge
But the
is
pipe
for
will.
2-inch rainfall,
That
right?
will be for any rainfall.
And if you move it back onto
Once
the
pond
property,
fills
then
up,
you
it's
don't
just
have any
about
worry of any
discharge.
easements or any
Yep,
issues.
that's correct.
And I would be, again,
So
100%
that's easy
fine
to
with that.
do.
And it's closer to where the test pits are. I mean, that would be.
Just
an
remove that risk, remove that element. If it's, engineering wise, if it's capable, I say remove it. Move it back, scale it back, bring it, discharge it on the property in question, don't cross the line.
Correct.
And therefore you don't have to, you know, we don't have to worry about that risk of what we're talking about.
Right. Easy fix.
It seems like the best of all situations, right? So what's involved with that? Is that a new stormwater management plan submittal? No?
I mean, they can revise the plans too.
Okay.
It doesn't change the calculation.
I got it.
Could you revise the stormwater plan to discharge off to the west and avoid even touching the landfill property with any water?
It's uphill.
Yeah, that's where it goes.
That's-
We would,
That's
it
why,
would be,
that's why the pond is to the
Why is
east.
that corner?
yeah. It would, that would not be,
I guess the biggest thing
That'd
is
be
you
a
gotta
change.
see where samples
Wasn't there
go
even
back.
a drainage area divide, a watershed divide?
yeah, that's
That
further back.
requires
This
it to
goes
go
all
down
this
east?
way and then this
Yeah.
towards this way. Some of this goes here now, we would bring it over here. Yeah, this is higher, the west is higher. For the discharge point.
You can maybe point the discharge to the south towards Edgewood.
Yeah, but again, you got that residential property right
You got that
there.
residential
Right.
part.
You don't want
But isn't there
We might- we'd have to look at the
elevation change
and see,
that runs along where the road is?
kinda like a valley there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd have to look.
Well, it sounds like it's the developer's responsibility to buckle back down to that and see what they can design.
What's the best scenario there?
Needs review.
Mhm.
pull it back onto the property and then decide if it still stays in that southeast corner or if it goes straight south or whatever is best based on the topography
Mhm.
with the engineering's help.
Yeah, you could pull that back.
Mhm. That's another easement we don't need also,
Right.
True.
so I can get on that immediately tomorrow.
So we had two hypotheticals, or what were you following them?
Yeah.
The first one was
That
related to
was-
silt, that's what was the second one.
Second one was, his test bores on phase 3, buildings 10 and 11.
Oh,
That's already required.
No, I know it is, I'm just worried about what your plan would be if those come back horrendous too. I mean, do you have to abandon
so
Then we wouldn't put those two buildings
12%
up.
of your development?
Two buildings, I'd be more than happy to, if that was the case, I would be more than happy to take care of that. But again, getting back to, if we can keep moving on the remediation of the landfill site, that should, again, take care of that stuff. If we can work towards remediation on the
Right.
fill site in that corner,
continues to remove that risk.
it's gonna
long term.
continue to remove that risk. And again, you know, we talk about that site, you know, I had a conversation with one of the Lake Park residents today. That site is 3-4 feet higher in elevation. The water table moves to the southeast. How is water gonna flow up current, uphill? I mean,
Much bigger problems if that site floods.
right.
Well, one of the comments I made to Tony just earlier tonight.
Water going north is the Red River open.
One of the comments I made to Tony earlier tonight on the phone was about Lake Park. So obviously, people are very concerned, and for good reason. I
Yes.
mean, don't get me wrong, everybody understands where the concerns are coming, but nobody's questioning it. None of us built our house there to eventually have a body of water that we can't swim in or use or what have you. Obviously, that's not the intent. So, but what was interesting, if you think back, many don't necessarily know the history, but if you think back, Payne and Dolan had that site, 80 acres. They bought the additional site from Don DeVac, or whatever his name is, right? And they combined to create that 100-acre site. Did all the testing back then to prove out the concept of building Lake Park.
Correct.
They graded it, we're talking 15 years ago. The
Yes.
grading and excavation work went. And think about that, 100 acres was excavated and graded, including a 30-foot deep pond.
Right.
30 feet deep. And during all that processing, they didn't run into high levels of contaminations and risks. It didn't disrupt the area because, again, it's right next to the landfill. We
Correct.
didn't see, here we are 15 years later,
Right.
and we don't see, we're testing our water, we don't see contaminants in our water, alluding to the fact that that development, which was 15 years ago, disrupting all of that soil, caused any, that we see, damage at this point. Not saying that we need to be asleep at the wheel and not be concerned, but it does prove a point that there was a large-scale development and excavation project north of this fill, and it didn't seem to undermine the ground enough to shift whatever has been buried in that site.
So, and what did I counteract back whenever you told me that?
Say it aloud.
All right, so whenever Payne and Dolan went ahead to develop that property into the gravel pit and then eventually into Lake Park development that it is now, they ran it off of 3 monitoring wells with 2 samples taken out of those monitoring wells, period. It's never been recorded.
Yep.
There might be more someplace, but nobody can find it if that's the case. So, however they went about doing it, they found contamination in 2 of those 3 monitoring wells. One of which was on just the edge of the landfill, north edge of it. And then the other 2 were heading directly north of there. They did 3 test pits, little ditch areas, and all 3 of those came up with some general contamination in it. The general thought was, we're putting in a gravel pit, we don't need to worry about the contamination at that point. That's the language that I can find. Whenever they went past the gravel pit and went into development of Lake Park, I can't find any successive testing that they did past that. Zero.
Development was always the end goal from the very beginning, before they ever approved
I
it.
absolutely get that, but there was absolutely no further testing done to see if anything with the gravel pit had affected any of the hydraulics in the soil. Now thankfully, it does not look like it has, because we just finally got the well tested that's nearest to the landfill. The developers, Payne and Dolan, was supposed to have tested that well per state DNR requirements, and they did not. And the homeowner just went ahead and got it tested, and it came back and it was somewhat high in arsenic and a couple of other things, but it
Which
was
is
not.
consistent around here.
I was gonna say, that's a private
Yeah,
well.
come to Brookfield.
Right.
I'll show you arsenic.
Right.
Yeah.
I get it, so there's arsenic in the soils, there's arsenic in the water and everything too.
Thanks to the farmers.
But, what's that?
Thanks to the farmers of the chemicals they put
No,
in
it's
their own-
natural occurring.
It's natural occurrence, right. It's all natural.
So, some of the things that should have been done during both the gravel pit and then successfully after the gravel pit was finished, I can't tell that any of that was complete. And that concerns me because that's not the due diligence that has to happen when developments go in near an uncontrolled hazardous waste site. It also concerns me that nobody, and all the testing that they've done through time, has shown that there's free product inside of that landfill up until the sampling that was done last January. That's the first time that it's been recorded, but it was not tested. They tested the groundwater underneath, but they didn't test the 48 inches, the 4 foot of black sludgy liquid material that was found inside that pit, inside of where the original landfill is suspected to be. Now that area, as I've reiterated time and time again, is within feet of where structure, permanent structure is being put in. Buildings, roads, the wet basin, stormwater pond, all that, within feet of it. That's why I'm so concerned with doing our due diligence to make sure that we don't have any further liabilities on us, the village, Vernon, the landowner, the developer, and all the residents around us.
I understand.
That's where I'm coming from, Jamie. It's a bigger picture than just trying to move you forward in a short amount of time to get the project started.
I understand that, but how much due diligence? You're talking about Payne and Dolan, $100-some million company. You're talking about Newman Development. Do you think all of these people are gonna go through this with there's testing, whether or not you guys can find it, there's testing. I can guarantee it. We can call Jamie Sonnenberg. It's out there. There's no way that amount of work can be done and the testing not be done. There's no, again, due diligence on multi-$100 million, companies that can just go in there and do this.
So Kapoor just did a review of everything and they couldn't find anything on it because it wasn't referenced in any of the materials that they got.
But what I'm saying is how much due diligence, how much do you need to do?
Whenever Kapoor looked at your site to see if it was safe or not, they missed important things like contamination inside of the wells. They missed the fact that there's an underground storage tank that was reported being down underneath. 2 other ones that were leaking, they removed them out, but there's contaminated soil on that property. So how much due diligence do you want? Do you want to protect yourself or do you just want to build on top of it and not worry about what's down underneath? That's the question, because it's all about liability. Your property that you own next door, the landfill, is affecting this property and this project in my mind, and that's what I'm conveying to the board, because of the liquid, uncontrolled hazardous waste that's in that landfill right now and how it's going to be effectuated by what you do with this property.
This property is in the same situation.
Right, again, but how many people?
Is it really that tough to go through a little bit more process, delay it by maybe another month or two until we
It
can
is.
get this stuff
You
done?
don't realize the cost that I've incurred on this project.
You
Again,
realize the cost that could be incurred if we don't go through the due diligence. And it comes back and it sticks us with additional
it's very
liability.
easy for you to say that, but there's gonna be a point where there is gonna be no more money to spend on this. And then you know where it's gonna sit? Exactly where it is right now.
Which is?
Vacant. Looks like a pile of shit, a dilapidated building, and all my equipment sitting there.
So let me ask you this, if you went through the process that I've mentioned in the past 2 times on looking at...
You never said one
remediation,
thing last month. We sat here and it was tabled, nothing was done last month, and Mary asked multiple times, and I brought this up, Warren, I brought this up to you. Nothing was said last month. You said nothing about any site assessments at that time. Now you wait an entire month. If you were so worried about it, why weren't you spouting emails to people saying, hey, this is stuff that we need to get done. This is stuff that we need to get done. So that it comes back to
It was
me.
complete on March 2nd. That was after our last meeting. I did not see it until yesterday. Yesterday was the first time that I got that information, and the packet, this whole packet I got the day before. I've literally reviewed all this in the past 48 hours.
Okay.
I did not have access to it today. It was not released to us.
You knew that this was a concern. If this was a concern of you, it's been a concern since the beginning, you should have stated this stuff right from the beginning, so if it was that important.
The first time this was brought to the table, I brought this back 4 years ago to the board at that point, whenever you guys were looking to put mini warehousing on the landfill site. And I was told at that point that things were in the works to try to clean that up and everything would be good and we wouldn't have to worry about any contamination being taken off site. Zero was accomplished in the past 4 years. None. Not a darn thing.
Correct. Right.
So that's where we're at.
Okay.
Well, you said this next round of sampling is supposed to come back pretty soon, correct?
Yes.
You said maybe Friday or Monday.
Correct.
I think that's really the starting point to where we go next, right? The
Well, again,
sample,
that's in.
the samples, the initial samples from the water, from the retention pond come back, and we see if they're hot or not.
And if they're not,
And if they're not, then I just wasted another month.
I agree.
That was part of the
But-
conditional
It's a
approval.
It was part of the conditions.
Recommended by the engineer, the attorney, and the planner.
Right.
Correct.
Was if everything comes back good,
we go.
we're gonna grant conditional approval.
Knowing that there's still other things that we're waiting for. right?
There's
The-
still a whole
the
laundry
plans,
list
yeah.
of things in there, but, you know, that's
Correct.
one of the topics. Now,
Yeah. But
I
based
think-
on when I don't know, I mean, looking at the timeline, based on when the sampling was scheduled, I mean, like,
It was never asked.
I mean,
I did sampling, I literally dug those exact same pits 2 weeks earlier. I could have taken the samples then. Nobody had said something, they say, we want the perk testing. Then I come back and again, I need more, I need more, I need more. Why wasn't this told from the very beginning? It's the second somebody recommended that they wanted actual samples, chemical samples, I had a crew over there the next day to take the samples, literally. This isn't just about me making $1 and getting going. I can tell you that with 100% certainty. But I feel specifically, Tony is 100%, I get his concern, but he is over analyzing this. It's a 4-acre build site that's gonna bring a third of the revenue that your entire subdivision does to the village of Big Bend. A third in tax revenue. With no kids going to school, with no streets to plow, nothing. This is a big project for the village. You know, I understand, again, I can't reiterate how much I understand your concerns, but I feel like you're over analyzing this.
well, I guess the question to the commission would be, do we grant conditional approval as presented? Or do you feel we need to throw more conditions on top of this?
Well, I think one of the potential addition that we had talked about was related to that outlet. And if there's an engineering change to the outlet that removes that level of risk, then that kind of removes the need for that additional condition in your report. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. That was the one specific I remember off the top of my head as far as an additional we were talking
Right.
about.
The other additional was to do current sampling at 10 and 11
Correct.
versus waiting
But ultimately,
until those are going to be.
if he's comfortable that if he's gonna wait 2 years and get to it, and then at that point, it presents the soil samples are too bad, he's saying that we would just abandon those two buildings.
That's all I wanted to ask.
So to me, that's a trade-off, either you sample now and you sample later, to now to figure out if there's a problem to address, or later, and if there is a problem, just say forget those two buildings.
What happens with this plan though, if he decides to abandon those buildings? What are we left with? We're left with the unfinished plan, and so this means nothing.
There's a
Well,
modification.
That's why, that's
He
why.
may have the opportunity to mitigate
Yeah.
at that
Depending
time
on
too,
what the
depending on
contamination is.
what the severity level is and how, you know.
You could
Right,
evaluate.
and if we can continue with the testing for the landfill site and work towards remediation as a village, as Vernon, as one of the, parties on that site,
Over the next
that
year.
may be taken care of and
Right.
completely negate that issue with building 10 and 11. I mean, that's my end goal, is to keep moving forward with this testing and work towards remediation for the dump site so that none of this becomes an issue.
What happens with the time frame then, if he has to mitigate that 10 or 11? And then if he's at, we have a time frame where this project's supposed to be complete.
We don't know, that's why it's an estimate on 10 and 11.
There's a fail-safe that will be written into the development agreement that basically says, if buildings 5 and 6 never come to fruition, you're gonna have to complete full
The
site
landscape.
stabilization and full site landscaping.
Right.
So.
Is there a concern that the borings for 10 and 11, something would change with the development? Is that why postponing it? Or would it be better off just to do it now, and that way we know the project's going forward, we know where it's going, and
We
be
talked
done
about
with it?
that earlier. The idea is if you sample now and not 2 years from now when it's likely the timeline of putting those buildings up, something could have changed.
Mhm.
So it's more beneficial to sample when you're about to build because it's a real snapshot. Let me ask the easy question. So there's already gonna be some additional testing that was required per your recommendation, right? For those 2 buildings, was that 3 and 4?
10 and 11, and then 3 spots in the pond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
But
the
did-
the
The
three
ones
spots
in
on
the
the
pond
pond
are
have
already
been
done, right?
Yeah.
And 10 and 11 is before they're built.
Phase 2.
Yeah.
Yes.
But for the sake of tonight in the discussion and meeting in the middle, would you be willing to go test site 10 and 11 now for peace of mind? Even though you know you're not gonna build that until 2 years, you might not need to in 2 years. Like you said, you might not even need to test it. If you've got the mitigation done on the landfill,
Right.
you might not even need to worry about that. You might have already dealt with the issue.
But
And-
the new phase of proposed testing for the landfill site is PSI moving those probes out basically to where we're gonna test.
So again, what I'm saying is for peace of mind and settlement tonight, would you be okay taking on testing 10 and 11 now, knowing it's that lot line closest to,
Right,
just to get an idea, is there a problem there or not? You don't necessarily have to address it right now because you're not gonna construct there, but it'll tell you really quick whether or not we know, we hope that the test, those 3 coming back from the pond will be clean.
right,
Then the assumption is to the north, you probably have a good shot of those being clean too, if that's the case.
right.
And it gives everybody the peace of mind that the testing was done now along that whole lot.
So was the last testing in that northwest corner of the landfill, the stuff that was done last January 2020? So it's been a full 15 months since anything's been done on the landfill site. Just so we kind of get a timeline going here on, we accelerate it, but it's still been 15 months since any activities happened, knowing that there's development next door. My other question is, are we concerned about the landfill cap? I talked extensively about that.
That's the additional testing that I'm proposing for the village. Because again, you open this can of worms. The village and Vernon now, everything moving forward, I'm pushing the village, Vernon and Big Ben. You know what I mean? At your cost, basically. So the next round of testing, I would have had done already had I got approval. If the proposal's there, it's ready to go.
So you're waiting on?
Waiting on the village of Big Ben and Vernon to give me the go-ahead.
I did not-
And that was a discussion from 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. I basically said, here's the proposal, it was, PSI sent the proposal, it was sent to Kapoor. I said, I leave it in your guys' hands, when you wanna decide you wanna move forward with the testing, I'm ready to go right now.
Okay, that's news to me, didn't know anything about that.
It's something we have to budget for, and same with Vernon.
Yeah, and so just to rewind real quick, related to 10 and 11. It's a kind of a blunt question right now, but would you be willing to test those 2 right now?
I would.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is, if we move forward, if
I get it,
the
I
village
get it.
gives me, if the village says go ahead, those tests will be done in 2 or 3 weeks.
the challenge is, you're talking about asking the village to allot money when we're into the year, at the end of March, we're in a budget year,
Mhm.
that there's no fundage budgeted or earmarked for those testing,
Yeah.
right? So that's the challenge.
Do you think I got money
I'm
earmarked
just saying,
budgeted for
no, what
testing?
I'm proving is a point that it's highly unlikely we're gonna find money to help spread around to pay for
Mhm.
that testing that promptly or quickly.
But that's a different project as well.
Agreed, but regardless, I understand what James' concern is, if you could test the same site
But
twice.
it's not related to this other project.
Agreed, but it has a bearing to a certain degree, and that's the kicker. The concern is valid where he's saying, hey, I could test it, I could take on the cost now and test it myself, and then let's say we get the approval from the villages to say, hey, we're gonna take
We're gonna
on,
have to test a foot over.
yeah, we're gonna take on the burden and we're gonna be able to do these tests. I think Vernon can talk to them for themselves, but nobody's budgeted for that spending of money for this calendar year, which leads me to believe it's a pretty tall ask for us to all of a sudden find a way to spend the money on that testing quickly.
So here we go, we're 30 years into that landfill, and we're going to be another, because now it's gonna get buried between everybody's budgets. The liability is still gonna stick out there. Right? We know that there's liquid contamination in there.
Yeah.
Anybody wanna tell me, anybody wanna stick their neck out and risk it and say that that's not gonna move when we start doing this stuff to the west? You guys certainly didn't. Kapoor did not put that down at all. Anybody else? Mr. Schober?
All I can tell you is defer to the experts. That's all I can tell you. Reasonably defer to the experts, I think you're protected.
And the experts thus far has said everything's okay.
Well, do we have any kind of budgetary on this landfill piece that you just hinted at as far as a couple weeks ago? Was there dollars thrown
The
around?
proposal was sent over.
Can you quickly elaborate, high level?
It was
what you
about
spent?
$16,000 for the next round.
Okay. I'm trying to put it in my head as far as how easy or hard would it be to find funding to handle it, knowing that there's multiple pockets that it could come out of, it's not responsible from one party.
Right.
I mean, legitimately what would happen because of that letter that was presented of the interested parties, or the responsible parties, Vernon's named, Big Ben's named, you guys are obviously named as the current owners.
Monarch Realty.
Monarch Realty is defunct, they're not even in existence anymore.
I don't think so.
As well as the individual named who's not even living anymore. So it really comes down to the three parties.
It's us three, yeah.
What I've been told through the conversations I had is that a percentage of ownership gets assigned via those parties.
Which
It's
is,
not
the majority is Vernon.
exactly, that's where I was going. So what the conversations I've been having through the people I've talked to related to this is how does this shake out? And when it shakes out, the DNR would be the ones to drive that, to say, you're the primary responsible party. It was your active fill site.
So they've already determined that through the responsible party letters. So
Correct.
they've identified
That's
the current owner
correct
by state and federal statutes is responsible to do the cleanup, and then they can come back and petition for fundage however they feel appropriate.
And I personally am the only one that has moved forward on testing since I've owned the property. Vernon or Big Ben has not.
I can't deny that.
Right.
But my point being is that from the discussions I've had, it's likely that the lion's share of the burden of cost should be assigned to Vernon, based on the fact that they operated the site. And were the ones that put the contaminants or allow the contaminants in the site. That's the conversations I've had. That there'd be a percentage split, let's say it's a 60, 20, 20, or whatever is determined, but the large percentage would be a shift towards the owners at the time. I'm just saying, so when we're talking about if it's $15,000, it's not us coming up with all $15,000 is my point. I'm not saying that it solves the
It's a
issue.
shared cost, but it's.
Yeah.
But they got budget issues as well.
Right.
And they're
Agreed.
not as motivated as the village is.
But there's also,
See this get
there's also
resolved.
programs out there, state and federal.
Yeah, you said
Brownsville.
the Brownsville guy.
I've talked to the DNR and he didn't think that was gonna be something that was gonna work for this site.
Not anymore.
Huh?
That sounds bizarre.
Not anymore. Used to be, but
Right,
not anymore.
yeah, I talked to two of the DNR and both of them had said,
All right, so cycling down.
Yeah, we need to circle back onto this, where we're at here.
So, based with all that being said, Jamin,
I'm sorry, what?
With all that being said, circling back, would you agree to test 10 and 11 now? I understand the concern about the potential of testing that area of the vicinity somewhat soon, but we don't know.
I would be willing to do it, but again, in the same and I'm not trying to drag this out, but in the same conversation, I just asked about testing in the villages, like, we don't have money to do it. Now you're turning around and asking me to do additional testing that right now, that isn't required right now at my cost. I don't have the funds to do this. I'm already way in the hole with just the extra testing that I've had to do on this. I mean.
Then here's your answer.
Fair enough.
I have to say, I remember during our staff meeting where the environmental fellow from Kapoor was in attendance. He did say initially, you're gonna have to do testing at sites, at building sites 10 and 11. And we all went along with our meeting, and that was, I guess, we all thought that was just going to be an accepted condition. Then when he learned that 10 and 11 were not going to be built until a future phase, he retracted that requirement and said, I would rather have these tests done when the buildings get built.
And that's what led to her recommendation of the timeline shift.
Right,
Okay,
because it could show up as, they may find a methane reading, for instance, in today's test.
Yeah.
But the fact is that methane may not be there
2 years from now.
when the buildings go up. So if you get a positive test today, you don't know what it tells us.
Yeah,
If you
but
get a
it would
negative, it's
pretend-
great.
Yeah,
If
that's
you
what
get
I'm getting at.
positive-
I was leaning towards, obviously, if it was a negative, then that would put people's minds at ease that there's no contamination now, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I was leaning towards, but ultimately, if, again,
If
it was
it's
a
positive,
question
I
worth
don't know
asking.
that we can dig our heels in and say that's a reason not to proceed with your project,
Agreed.
Yes, sir.
I think as, depending how this project goes, and I don't have a crystal ball, if they're on the timeline 10 years, that was one number that came up. The number that was on your presentation here was the 2024, right? That's 3 years from now. Again, I don't have a crystal ball. Things move faster. All I'm hearing from everybody who's got a gripe about whatever is very interested in this and would be very interested in acquiring one of these or very interested in renting one of these. So that means that we're talking about 42, we're not talking about 402. We're talking about 42. This very conceivably could occur by 2022. And if it's moving that fast, I don't think Jamin's going to be in a position to say, well, let's wait until we're just ready to build 10 and 11. I think when he's in building 8 and 9 and he's seeing that he can't build them as fast as he's got people who want them, he's going to test 10 and 11 and get your answer for you.
And if
But again, we don't have a
positive-
crystal ball here.
Right. The funds are, the funds are running out of, I need to get these buildings moving to get funds to do this stuff. That's my whole point here. I'm running out of money before it happens. I need to get the buildings going to start selling them, making the money, and then I'll do as much testing as you guys want. And if the test comes back positive, I'll have the funds to remediate it or dig that site up and fix it, that section, but that's way down the road. Hopefully not too far down the road, but.
What's your level of soft interest right now as far as names on a list that are supposedly committing to one?
We've got.
You can't talk to a lot of people because you don't have approval, but we've got.
Agreed, but you got some level
We've got 6
sold.
6 that have
A verbal.
definitely committed to buying one.
Okay.
We have 4 more individuals who are very interested, but you can't go back to them and say, I can get you in a building in July if we don't have approval and don't know if we're even going to get approval by July.
Agreed. I was just trying to get us a high-level idea of what.
My guess is once you approve or get some kind of a conditional improvement where we can start actually advertising and knowing what the timeline is, that very quickly we'll understand if the builder can keep up with the demand.
But what I was trying to understand where the tone was now, and you basically spoke to the fact that you've got almost a fourth of them verbally in deep talks.
Yeah.
And even though there's no contracts, because you can't right now, I get it, but
Right.
I'm just trying to get an idea of how quick it could conceivably go.
I don't
If
think
you
we're gonna
already
be
got
able to build
10,
them fast enough.
I'm on the Walter side of it, the building side of it, and right now I've got 7 people that want to do these besides this, from Highway 43 to Waukesha to the lake. So I mean
trying
that's
to do
how.
the same type of development?
Absolutely.
Wow.
So again, the
So, I mean,
delays,
that's-
we're gonna lose out on people that
What's
are
that?
interested. I mean,
Yeah.
it's time sensitive.
Sure.
I mean, it really is.
Yeah, you lose your potential customer base, it's no
Yes.
longer.
Absolutely.
I get
But
it.
yeah, it's definitely like the next. And they're not talking mini storage. I'm talking like big
Ownership.
big storage. There's 3 of them that want to build that new park down in Waterford. That new area they want to do. There's 3 people down there that want to put these in, and yeah.
I don't have a problem with it as long as those tests pass.
Yeah, the conditions from the
And I
engineers and
think, I
stuff.
think we can, that's my opinion. If the tests come back clean, let them go.
And again, it's not just about the test, there's
Right,
there's a bunch of other
right,
recommendations
right.
that are contingencies.
But I mean, that's the biggest,
conditions.
that's our biggest trivia.
Agreed, that's obviously a big part of the concern is related to the contamination or risks.
Right, because if they're clean, because what we're talking about is, has the waste migrated past to where the retention pond is versus where the landfill ends and the land lot line, correct? So if it's migrated and you do the samples and they're hot, then we got an issue.
Right.
But if they're clean, I think that kind of, I mean, it's not 100% green light, but I think it's pretty darn close.
I think it's a starting point.
I think you have to go with what the attorney told us too.
Yeah.
We have paid professionals on both sides of the fence here. We've paid,
Right.
not as much as Jamin, I think, but we pay a lot of money to our professionals as well. And
And if
if there comes a point when you gotta trust them and
Yep.
Well, do we see any concern with the cap? And bring it back again.
That's another story.
It's a separate property.
Separate property.
yeah,
Yep.
it doesn't affect this.
It does affect this, we're putting a road over it.
And the DNR signed off on that road.
Yep,
Right.
with the presumption that there was a cap.
No, not with the presumption. The DNR signed off on it the way that it is. They looked up whatever they looked up, the records, and they said, it's a landfill. We understand, it even states, I think, in the email, cap or other material, I think, in the actual email.
Yeah, he does make reference that he's not sure about the location of the cap.
He understands that.
He understands.
But again, getting back to remediation could just be putting a cap on it,
Another one, if it doesn't already exist.
if it doesn't exist, or adding more.
If it doesn't exist, we need our money back.
Well, so, the latest letter specifically writes, since the proposed road will be constructed over the top of the existing road without disturbing the landfill cap, and then again, you had a follow-up with him, because then there was discussion, like, on the north side, there will be a slight possible risk of disturbing the
Right.
cap.
And
So
Travis-
there it's calling out the landfill cap, so if if they don't have documentation, but yet they're calling it out, that's not on us, that's on them.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's my point, as far as risk or liability, they're the ones that own that decision, because they're calling it out in the documentation that it exists. Whether or not we can find it is a different story as far as
I can share with
tangible
you.
The
documentation.
final
Yeah,
due diligence is up to the developer, the landowner, and the other parties involved. You're never going to successfully draw the DNR into a liability issue.
You're never gonna come to a conclusion.
I don't feel like the DNR would sign something like that if they didn't feel confident that it wasn't an issue.
I will say that Travis recognized the fact that there was no mention of a cap, no detail of a cap in the materials that he reviewed, and it was part of his discussion, he told me when he called the DNR, to make sure that that was considered. What the discussion was, the exact wording, I can't say, but Travis did mention that to me as part of his meeting.
maybe somebody wants to make a motion, give a second, and then have a little discussion.
I think
If there's a-
think we got a lot of discussion.
If there's a desire to amend the motion, to add something else to it, then that could be done, of course, this to a conclusion.
Started off anyway, right?
Yeah.
Are we making a motion to basically consider your recommendation, but wait for the samples to come back?
We are either
and
looking.
discuss next month?
What I'm looking for is either a motion with the conditions that are spelled out by the engineer, the planner, and our legal counsel,
Sure.
plus possibly moving that outlet pipe.
That I'll make sure is taken care of.
That's one of the conditions.
Or
For
whatever
my,
else.
for my part, what I'm looking for in terms of landscaping, is a motion to direct village staff to complete that process with the applicant, and bring that final plan back as an exhibit. It will be on-site landscaping, okay? What I'm looking for is you guys to decide if you concur with that or not. I'm also looking for a decision about the 50% requirement for brick material or masonry material on the buildings. The rest of these things have all been ironed out basically by the planning commission as recited by me. And if you object to anything that I recited through that whole dissertation, you could say so. But those are the only two things I'm looking for from the planning side of things. The rest, I think we've got it all ironed out, you know. They responded to your requirements from the first meeting.
Would you like separate motions?
Well, and just to clarify, the motion would be to force this into a conclusion at some point, would be to approve the site plan of operation, request of Peterson, subject to the conditions that have been mentioned in the reports of the staff. And if there's any further, I guess that's the motion at this point. That gets us started. If someone wants to amend that motion, and I you do, sir, I think perhaps one of you wants to extend it further, then a motion to amend it and see what happens with that one.
But again, if that was the motion, you'd have to also include the additional recommendation related to that outlet.
Yeah.
Moving the outlet back, because that's not in the reports for the professional
That-
recommendation.
that's an additional.
So that's an additional piece of that
The
motion.
landscaping and the architecture.
Right.
Right.
So
need
that
to
would
be
be the
addressed.
addition, the landscaping plan on-site for staff level, and then the architectural relief related to the 50% masonry.
Right.
Those are your, basically your three
Right.
pieces.
I'd take that motion if you guys can put it in the words.
We can.
That's what I think.
Yeah, that's not that bad.
You have the motion?
I'll second.
I understand that motion, Kelly, I can help you in that one. Okay.
We have a motion by Paul, a second by Mike. We have discussed the heck out of it. Any further discussion? Call for the vote. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. We will move on to item, we got 3C here.
Yeah, it's
Four-
the second.
4A. Review discussion, possible approval of off-site signs proposed to be located along State Highway 164, Big Bend Drive and Edgewood Avenue, both as temporary, coming soon / now available type signs, or as future permanent project identification signs proposed in support of the applicant Jim Peterson, doing business as Lake Park Storage Condominiums LLC, request to develop a 42-unit self-storage small business condominium project on 4.11 acres of land located north and east of State Highway 164, Big Bend Drive at Edgewood Avenue, excluding direct frontage on either. The prospective location along State Highway 164, Big Bend Drive is Zone B3 General Business District, and the prospective location along Edgewood Avenue is Zone R3 Residential.
So the sign that's proposed is up on the screen. We don't know the materials. To me, it looks like a flat piece of wood.
Isn't it?
It's steel, it's aluminum,
It's
it's aluminum
aluminum.
sheet, it's 4x8 with
Cardboard.
it's printed vinyl, like a decal. I
Okay.
don't know how else to describe it. That goes over it's
Steel corrugated.
it's steel corrugated. It's steel on the outside, but it looks like corrugated cardboard. So it's steel, and you put actually 3 posts because of the size to prevent it from becoming a fan.
Is it illuminated?
No.
No. And I
Is
did,
it one-sided?
Yes.
Okay. There are 2 locations for this sign proposed on the site plan. One of them is properly situated at 10 feet back, within the area of that road connection down to Edgewood Avenue, 10 feet back from the edge of right of way. The other shows it straddled onto the neighboring property to the south, which is not acceptable. It needs to be at least 10 feet back from the Highway 164 right of way, and at least 10 feet off that lot line to the south. Unless you find or get an easement, even a temporary easement from that neighboring property owner to the south of the 30-foot easement, allowing you to be on their real estate or within 10 feet of it.
okay.
So these are the temporary signs that are just during the period of time that the units are being constructed. Is that correct?
No, that one's not, it's the other one.
What other one?
I submitted 2 signs. The other one is the
Coming soon.
the coming soon sign, same size and everything. It's got a depiction of the development on it, right?
Like a site plan.
I know I sent it in that packet. Yes.
That's it.
Yeah, there.
I don't. I must, but I just haven't.
Too many files.
So, what are the dimensions of this sign?
The exact same size. In the one that I sent you PDF, the listing, everything is on there. I had the sizing and
Okay.
It would just get
They're
switched
both
out.
32 square feet, and one goes out by 164 and one goes by Edgewood?
yeah, so that temporary sign would go up first, the coming soon.
All right,
Then once we get going on the development, then that sign would come down and the permanent sign, which is the one that you had up, would go up in replacement of that one.
no. Okay. I think that it is, I think it would be reasonable to approve the temporary construction period signs at this time. The permanent sign is going to require a landscaping plan, and it's also going to require a permanent easement for the benefit of the condominium owners association.
Okay.
So,
That couldn't be put into the existing road easement that is part of the condo association? Because that's a 60-foot wide easement going down to the road, and a 30-foot wide easement on the 164 side.
30
And 30 foot on that side, and 60 foot on the Edgewood side.
yeah. How are you going to meet that 10 feet and 10 feet though on that 60 foot, on Highway 164?
Well, if we narrow that down, that 30-foot easement down to 24, and we have that right on the edge, it should be, I don't even need a permanent sign out there, to be honest with you. I just want a temporary sign out there
On 164.
on 164. So I guess it would be temporary sign for here, and I can submit a landscape plan and everything for the permanent one.
I'm gonna suggest that no temporary signs would be put up anyway before a final approval is granted.
Mm-hmm.
And so this should come back at that final meeting
Okay,
with the correct locations for both of the signs shown.
well, I mean, those are the correct locations.
Well, one of them shows a sign sitting over that lot line,
Okay, all right.
so. Let's get the documentation
Okay.
nailed down.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Yep.
I would suggest that this be tabled for the final meeting.
Well, not a legal issue. I gotta say that the sign is the front door to your development. It really sets the tone for your development.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's an upscale development, it should be an upscale looking sign.
Okay.
I agree with that. I think a nicer sign should be on Edgewood.
Okay.
You know, something like Lake Parks or something like that, that's gonna, not, maybe
why I
not quite
assumed it
that
was
much,
temporary.
but something that's gonna be a more of a monument.
Agreed.
I mean, they are upper scale storage condos, it's not a
Yeah.
rental place,
Right.
you know, mini storage.
It's to your advantage.
Yeah, we can do that for sure.
So we'll table this one. Motion to table this for potential design change and permanent placement location.
Mm-hmm.
I'll make that motion table.
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
No, there's no illumination.
You're writing it down for it? Nice. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
We've got about 6 minutes left to call through this before our recording turns off. Planners report for February, March 2021.
I have,
All in the white.
That's.
yeah, I did talk with, Everett's son, and I forget his name already, David, about landscaping, yes. Right.
I believe that's.
I have not seen a plan from him yet, but he had told me that he was going to be preparing one. The last time I gave you an update, it was to tell you that they had combined 2 of the 3 lots. So really, you know, they're just plugging along just fine. Ripple Brook, no, that's, update about the streetlight at the intersection of Canterbury and Ripple Brook. I actually don't have an update about that. The trustee,
We had some
president.
serious discussion about it at the last board meeting, and we are trying to get a hold of the developer to see if he has any documentation showing that the board signed off on it. Because there is
The
belief,
exemption or relief.
right,
of doing
there's
said
belief
work.
that the board passed an exemption at one point. Unfortunately, we can't find documentation on that.
I think they might have, because the village would potentially be the one picking up the cost of the light and the maintenance and everything, and I think that they did do that.
Even though it was, we talked about this already, about it being in the contract for the development.
But I think they may have passed afterwards on that, if I'm remembering correctly.
So, yeah,
Because they didn't want another light, street light to pay for.
And Eric randomly brought that up at the board meeting, right?
right. So we'll find out and report back.
Somebody should have a copy of someplace, otherwise you're just going to plop it in the developer's hands and they can prove otherwise.
That was,
Like we should have.
well, my comment was, why didn't we conditionally pass it?
We either gotta get this through, or I gotta go turn the recording off and restart it. And we gotta
I
take
do
an
have
intermission.
one additional thing that I had promised the property owner that I would bring up for the commission tonight, and that is he has 8 acres of land, 8+ acres of land. It's up on the north side of town. He wants to raise pheasant, you know, not a ton of birds, 60 to 100, something in that range. And he's not, his parcel's not big enough. Our agricultural overlay, which is the district he would need to be able to do that, requires that you have 10 acres to begin with, okay? 10 acres of property. Then you can request the addition of the ag overlay onto your property, which allows you to conduct agricultural uses. The question I promised him I would ask is there just a feeling at this commission about whether you are interested in finding some way to make that a plausible opportunity on an 8-acre site? Or
You're saying 8 acre or
8.
80?
8. Just kind of a knee-jerk reaction is what I'm looking for to let him know where I thought it was.
I personally would entertain seeing more information about it, at least.
Yeah, I
to
know,
bring
I said
to
we
the
talk
board.
about
I
it.
don't want to dismiss it without knowing much about it.
Right.
Okay. All right. A little version of how he might do it on his site.
Small proposal. Idea, give us an idea of what he's really trying to accomplish.
Yeah, commercial or for his own use or whatever he might be doing, I guess.
Very good.
Okay, I'm next.
Yeah, you're next, but I think we're gonna have to take about a 3 or 5 minute intermission here.
Nah, I ain't that important.
Oh, I still gotta get through the engineer too.
Oh, jeez.
You could have
And
escaped.
because of
Could have escaped.
our recording,
Okay.
I've gotta stop and restart.
Please hold
Okay.
and listen to the music.
Not my fault.
I understand, I didn't think we'd go past 11.
What a foolish man.
Look out, you
Oh, sorry, I saw you. I just had to get back up and grab some more water.
Oh, heck.
That's a little night.
My old time records were